Clair Obscur's most illuminating attribute as a product was to make me realize that I am vulnerable to having my emotions toyed around with like a useful idiot. There are places and things here, on Earth, and in the gaming industry, where a thing might surely be the thing people purport it to. There are also plenty of places where people give far too much credit to something that they like, or love. I think Expedition 33 managed to overwhelm the eyes and ears of its player base, such that every other critical facet of their being was unable to analyze what was being played. And I don't say that with much venom, at all. I think Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a unique piece of art with a ton of flaws and layers of amateurish design that will mar its eventual Game of the Year award. But I do like it anyway. Sometimes I like it quite a lot. I'd actually say that at 7 out of 10, Expedition 33 can be more enjoyable to play than a lot of games I'd rate the same or higher. And this video will stand to explain why my rating and that fact are not to be considered mutually exclusive. The story of Clair Obscur and its mechanics walk hand in hand, and because of this, we have to follow along the story as a prerequisite to talk about the game's mechanics. I cannot begin discussing anything in this game without first talking about the point that thing is introduced to the story and how. Clair Obscur opens with a shot of Lumiere's harbor, the harbor of the only remaining settlement for humanity after a catastrophe known as the Fracture, created by the paintress, caused most of the known world to become fractured. And I should throw in here, as what is probably an unnecessary aside, but you really shouldn't be watching this video if you haven't played the game yet and want to. I'll be going off my interpretation of events to draw on the narrative, which may or may not be the same interpretation you would get playing on your own. If you want to play this game but haven't, stop watching this video and leave it for after you get to the credits, preferably twice. And if you don't think you want to play this game, change your mind. It's fun. The things it does so well that it's worth the price of admission, easily. I recommend everyone who loves gaming to play this title if for nothing else, just to see. Or hear. The harbor is where the remainder of humanity gathers once a year to pay homage to the inevitable gommage. A shot of our protagonist, Gustav, reveals his face paired with a playful piece of music. Look at that. He's quite hot. His sister, Maëlle, comments on a flower he's gotten for his lady. Wow, look at that. She's quite hot. The two make their way to the streets of the city where they happen upon Gustav's lady. Maëlle offers Gustav a duel to loosen him up before he talks to the old hag. And we have our combat tutorial. Clair Obscur saw the success of FromSoftware's dodging and parrying combat and said, nice. What if we did that, but the player can't move? I'd not describe the combat as revolutionary. Perhaps, if only to extend an olive branch, I would admit that Clair Obscur's inclusion of the parry and dodge mechanics at least lets us know that there's definitely room for them in the party RPG genre, but not as a default ability that overshadows everything to come after. Despite what you might have heard, there isn't anything particularly chemist about taking party-based mechanics and slapping on a parry prerequisite. When parrying, you have some kind of visual and audio cue that usually lets you know when to press the parry button. Ready. And successfully hitting it gives you AP, and lets you riposte for a fair bit of damage. The window for dodging is slightly bigger than parrying, but unless you are playing on the story mode difficulty, I don't see how anyone couldn't have immediately recognized that parrying is the only way to play the game without extending hours required to X, because you'd like to dodge for no AP, and no riposte damage for some reason. It's a parry simulator, trying to shake hands with party-based RPG mechanics, and we'll have more to say about that later. Gustav smacks the shit out of his sister, and then follows up that abuse by going to the streets below to talk to Sophie. Just before this, Maëlle says,
I don't really understand. You and Sophie broke up so long ago. But clearly you never got over her. Why'd you wait until today to say something? It's a bit late, isn't it?
If you think people breaking up and then one of them not being able to let go for years before coming back professing their love is an immature writing trope for teenagers to fawn over, well, you're right. Gustav finally gets to Sophie, who is the first person in this game who we find looks less like hot and more like plastic surgery gone awry. Oh no. Nah. She's cute. It's just that her facial structure doesn't work too well with the animations of the game, which can sometimes be a little stiff. Hiya, Sophie. He offers her a rose for her necklace, which is already laden with flowers, if, quote, there is room. She responds with, there's always room, which is a very sly and clever metaphor for modern dating. Good job, Sandfall, I see what you did there. Very French. They then share this line.
You know, I'm sorry that... I miss
You
you
don't need
too.
to... Okay.
You go.
No, you.
Some rather cringe dialogue you'd expect from, again, a romance movie for teens, maybe. The two remark on what could have been between them, and a group of young boys scurry by, with one stopping to pay his respects to Gustav. You see, Gustav will be going on an expedition soon, the aforementioned Gommage, which takes the oldest members of humanity to their deaths every year, is followed just after by the sending off of an expedition, which usually contains older members of the race as they go to fight the Paintress, she who marks her monolith with the age of the next set of victims, a number that has been lowering by 1 every year. The expedition's prerogative revolves around killing the Paintress, therefore saving humanity from extinction at the behest of her curse. As it happens, Sophie is 33 years of age, which means the old horse is set to Gommage, as indicated by the big old number upon the monolith. It isn't perfectly clear how it works at first, but this number changes, and then, when it changes, everyone of that age or older Gommages. See? No tricky birthdays to get past the Paintress, alright? Gustav would like to spend these last moments with Sophie, and her him. The two make their way towards the plaza near the harbor. Along the way, they speak to a few people who have differing opinions on humanity's situation. A woman named Eloise speaks to Sophie about what she thinks is futility surrounding the expeditions. Sophie points out that Eloise's father died in an expedition and that he did so to fight for a better future for her and Eloise. She also says that the upcoming expedition might turn out differently since there are special people in this one, obviously referring to Gustav. So for real, the game has you try to prove that you're special by showing off your abilities. Gustav does this by popping a balloon, which causes Eloise to say,
That's... This guy is strong.
They wouldn't react that way. Oh no. She's inspired by his balloon popping and thus tells Sophie to give Gustav her father's valuable Lumina. Like, calm down, Eloise, it's just a balloon. The two walk by Lune, a guitarist and expeditioner who's performing for a final time before the expedition. The momentary couple have a short exchange.
Oh, Luna's playing. You two would make a cute couple.
If you say so.
Or maybe something already happened, huh?
I feel like we can chill out with the protagonist fantasy building, you know? Gustav doesn't need to get this kind of attention this much within a 30-second window. Anyway, Lune is another expeditioner, and wow, look at that! She's hot! And also feet! Sophie remarks on the look of the Paintress, and how sad she seems. I feel like this is a line that they recorded and then after spending the money on the voice acting decided to leave in despite it not working with the view distance allotted to the early game. It's poor direction because the Paintress, to me, seems out of range. Like the game just doesn't show her until you get to the harbor itself, and so for my first playthrough I was very confused at what was being commented on, but I suppose it's implied that they can both see her. That felt very amateurish to me. It makes total sense now, but I had no clue what they were talking about on my first playthrough. Our two lovebirds make it to the harbor, and thus begins Aya Sophie's final moments.
Oh, fuck!
I know.
The music and the art direction are just that good, when they are, indeed, that good. Which isn't always. I mean, every time I see something like that from this game, it's beyond perfect. I cannot believe that a game that managed to get such incredible music also had the talent around to make something that looks like this. Clair Obscur boasts very high ceilings for the quality of both the music and the artwork, though the floor, as we'll come to find, can be quite low to compensate. Gustav stymies his sadness by sharing the night with the rest of the expeditioners, who will be departing tomorrow. He finds Maëlle, who will be going on the expedition with them despite being much younger. He tells her that she has 9 good years to go before her gamage and that she might consider staying in Lumiere. She insists that she's going, and the two have another duel. After they exchange words.
Not bad for the oldest man in Lumiere, eh?
Congratulations! You beat a teenager.
I was just kidding about my L being hot, officer.
Take this token as your well-deserved prize.
Gustav's sister, Emma, who is hot, gives a speech to the expeditioners, and the lot drink the night away before taking off the morning after. As they set sail, the boy who saluted Gustav prior is smirking, like this. And then he salutes, like this. And the animation is really unsettling. Ugh. I think they used an adult for the motion capture or something, but then why not fix this? He looks older than my L, for fuck's sake. And thus begins our first real showing of Expedition 33 as they land upon the beaches north of Lumiere, south of the monolith. Everyone gets fucked up by Gollum. Almost every single expeditioner dies immediately. Gustav, smacked to the ground, looks to his right to see Mael, also smacked to the ground, being saved by someone. Lucien, a minor character, says putain to remind the player that this game is indeed French, before speaking perfect English once again. The woman next to him says merde to remind the player that this game is indeed French. Lucien then does a minor character thing and saves our protagonist by giving his life for him. Gustav looks into the ring fingers of death and does the protagonist thing of getting kicked in the head enough to pass out and end up somewhere else, but not die. Nice. And now we go from Clair Obscur the movie to Clair Obscur the video game. Act 1. Nice. Gustav wakes in the spring meadows. Lush greenery, bright skies, running streams. Yep, this is an early game area, all right. Spring Meadows takes the opportunity to show the player the culture of the studio developing it. You can turn around to the dead end behind you and collect some chroma, which plays into the loot under the waterfall cliche in a way that feels a little self-aware, and a lot of the game's world is designed exactly like that. There are side paths that are usually very obvious and lead the player to some extra loot or lore as a reward for exploring, but they don't drag the player off of their main goal for too long and exist really to make each area feel a little more involved than simply left joysticking to the north. The first enemy in this early game area introduces the player to the free aim system, which is used to spend precious AP on smacking enemies for minor damage, and as shown in this encounter can be used to target enemies' weak points. If a parry simulator, why not a third-person shooter too, right? And a bad one at that. The aiming feels really clunky and unresponsive, and all I'll say right now is that I'm glad they didn't put any weak points that are difficult to hit, because this game is just not meant for this kind of thing. You'll see me trying to get used to the parry system in some of this early footage, and honestly what you're looking at is the short and the long of the cue system for parrying. Some enemies have obvious audio cues, some don't. Some have obvious animations, others don't. There is no strict set of rules for this system, and you just have to figure out each enemy's timings for yourself. You have to become decent. Gustav continues on, finding the corpses of expeditioners ungamaged and unrotting lying about his path. A little further, the horror show of a coalescing group of dead expeditioners has him on his ass ready to kill himself. He draws his magic-y gun from the ether and points it at his head. The developers zoom in to show off their pistol design in case cosplayers want to accurately portray a suicidal drama queen. Shouldn't be too difficult. And then Lune appears. Gustav considers killing himself, but then remembers that Lune floats around barefoot and, well, if he's going to die anyway, might as well die staring at the goods that make life worth living. This is canon. The two take on a Nevron, one of their main minor enemies throughout the game. Now, this game might be a parry simulator, but it's still a party RPG at heart. For those unaware, a party-based role-playing game generally revolves around finding a group of unique individuals to help you take on some quest or another. The fun of the combat in this genre comes from trying to combine your party's abilities so that they may best work with one another. One party member you find might be good at tanking, while others can heal, or cause AoE, or deal single target damage. Generally, in modern party RPGs, the combinations can get really complicated, and that kind of depth makes them fun. Gustav is a sort of jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none character. He's very simple. His abilities are designed to make sure that players have access to the easy-to-understand options early on so that they can get good at the one thing. He plays every fight building charges with his Lumiere Assault ability. With 10 charges, his Overcharge ability deals massive lightning damage and can break or stun an enemy. Lune, in keeping with that theme of making sure the player has options early, is a utility character with a very wide access to elemental damages of single target and AoE varieties. She can heal her party, slow enemies, and generally just gives the group a fair bit of versatility, which is perfect for a first-time playthrough, since you'll be running into new enemies all the time and might need to change up your damage types to get through their resistances. After destroying the Nevron, the two absorb its chroma with their tech thingy. It's not really explained in depth, but Gustav helped to develop some technology that help with explaining away why the game has the mechanics that it has. He's like Jace, but he speaks French sometimes, and his game is actually fun to play. The first boss fight of the game is an Évêque, and I don't care if I'm pronouncing that or anything else in this game incorrectly. It might be wrong, but I like it. When your character starts walking all slow and sees these two cinematic bars appear, you're likely approaching a boss fight. Leo gets Zyroed and we have our fight. First, Sandfall Interactive brought you... Then they managed to follow up that work of art with...
Merde!
And now, get ready for their magnum opus.
Putain de merde.
I almost forgot that this game was French, thank you Sandfall. The boss fight has this music playing over it, and it's always good. All of the music, all the time. There are very few pieces of music in this game that I don't love listening to. And that goes for the music that hangs in the background when you're just walking through an area. Lovely. All the time, lovely. The Évêque only makes use of early game mechanics, parrying, dodging, and the occasional shield. Unfortunately, these mechanics aren't introductory mechanics, they're almost all of the mechanics the game has to offer, save for a scarce few that will be introduced one at a time, hours apart, later on. Even the Frosty Évêque you find in the Act 2 area of the game uses the same mechanics as this one, if just a few more moves to incorporate a second phase into the fight. And that is the story of most enemies in this game. Aside from the occasional gradient parry and a curse status that I didn't see until it jump scared me at the very end of the game, what you will find out about the game in the first 5 minutes are really all you're ever going to need to actively engage with to get through the game. For some, this will be a plus, because it means they don't have to overthink just to get through to the credits. And for others, it will be a negative, because it showcases a lack of mechanical depth. Regardless of what you think about it, what it most certainly does not represent is a pushing of the envelope or even a polished experience in the party-based RPG space. It's surface level. It all revolves around the fact that parrying effectively makes all mechanics mesh into one equation. You can either parry, or you can't. Among movesets of varying styles and negative effects of inconsistent lethality is a large melting pot of gray that molds itself into the question: how should I parry this? That somewhat gratifying but infinitely more tedious R1 dependency that Clair Obscur likes to pretend is a step forward for the genre is but an S-tier answer to everything the game has to throw at you. And when this S-tier answer is given for free, for every character, and against every enemy, party synergies and skill optimizations begin to fade away in the shade of the parry's all-encompassing crutch. I can promise you that treating every single thing in this game as something to learn parry timings for is not a step forward for the party-based role-playing genre. One side effect of the parry system is that developers only needed to plan around a small subset of things happening to the player and his or her party, because there is almost nothing that the opponent can do that can't be solved by the player parrying. Therefore, when you need an answer to something, like an opponent gaining a fuck ton of armor, you probably have the answer, since the few questions the game asks of you are met with a few obvious answers. At the same time, if you're in a fight and you don't have that answer, you're encouraged to just parry the fight for 3 times as long, and then perma-unlock the one skill required to answer the question, so to speak. In this case, the Évêque showcases armor gain. Armor, represented by this shield icon on the Évêque's HP bar, is the single most powerful mechanic the NPCs in this game often have access to, because each piece of armor absorbs an entire hit. Before acquiring the Paintress's Pictos, each of these pieces of armor might as well be a 10k HP buff for the opponent, since that's where your damage caps per hit. They force you to play around with multi-hit abilities that are cheap and low damage, or use your precious AP to chomp down on their armor status one shield at a time with free aim. Unless you want to take thrice as long completing the story and farming opponents, or, in some cases, unless you want to not kill your opponent, you'll need an answer for this. And once you find the answer, mine was Mael's breaking rules ability, or just free aiming shots, you don't really ever need to abandon it. There will be no playthrough where you don't use that answer from here on out, because the game is just not complex enough for you to think that there is any other option but to spam breaking rules and then parry to victory. We'll talk about this later. I've rambled about this level 1 boss long enough. Our duo destroys the Évêque, who for some reason moves back and forth instead of diagonally, and happens upon a note left behind some mysterious person. Took Mael to the weird corals. Lune says that this note sounds like an expeditioner.
It sounds like an expeditioner, but everyone knows to sign their messages.
Lune then says that it doesn't sound like anyone on the team.
Doesn't sound like anyone on the team.
I know the writers probably meant that it doesn't sound like anyone on Expedition 33 to forget their signature as per protocol, but come on, that's clunky right there. Don't do that again, writers.
Lead, whoever this is knows Mael. We have to go.
No. Not yet. Protocol is to regroup at the rally point and wait 3 days. This message feels off. If it was an expeditioner, they would have stayed here. Everyone knows the protocol.
Right, but they may have been in danger. Maybe this location has been compromised. Things change in the field.
There's a reason.
Protocol doesn't cover every contingency. You know that.
My footage doesn't have poorly aligned audio. That's just what their faces look like when they're talking in a cutscene that didn't get priority. Lune argues that the note is sketchy and will likely lead to a trap. Gustav's argument is I don't care, and he goes after Mael. Lune follows. In my opinion, there is a bit of a mixed problem in that both characters are arguing for absolutes when it shouldn't really be a matter of true or false. The location described in the note is north of their location, which means it's on the way to the Paintress's monolith. So they can go after Mael and just agree to reconsider if things seem to be getting increasingly sketchy. I can understand Gustav being a little out of sorts, but Lune, being the inquisitive thinker of the party, would probably have understood that they have no other leads, and so they wouldn't have anywhere else to go anyway. What, are they going to sit on the rally point where Gollum murdered everyone right in front of them? Of course not. I wish they would have given Lune some more depth as a character in this way, since she's supposed to be intelligent, but there are really no opportunities that are taken now or later in the game to push her beyond the barefoot thesaurus, who also plays guitar. She even has some lines of dialogue that would hit harder if she treated the situation with a level of thought that begets some respect on the part of the player.
That's your problem. You think in false dichotomies. It wasn't an either-or situation. Other solutions were possible.
But instead, she simply argues with Gustav in a way that is entirely unhelpful for the sake of cheap conflict. Gustav leaves, Lune caves and follows. And that concludes Spring Meadows. Now begins the player's first introduction to the broader map, known as the continent. When you're on the continent, great distances are represented as smaller for the sake of brevity, and you have the opportunity to explore what appears to be a much more freeing way than each instance location in the game will offer you. Enemies can be found scattered throughout, and with a fair number of unique and sometimes strange bosses among them. I'll be honest, when I first saw the continent and how it was represented, I felt it was a little off. The size of the characters juxtaposed to the environment around them felt childish and in a bad way. But as I learned about the culture of the game and how the story functions with what's happening to the characters, the more charming I found it. It's pretty to look at. It has just the right sort of energy to match up with the brighter half of Clair Obscur, while the assets that float about can sometimes have ominous, jagged features that don't quite let your mind at ease, as though there is some looming energy all around this place that isn't all that benevolent. The open world encounters usually just have normal Nevrons or other minor enemies to engage with. It's useful if you need a quick level or want to try your hand at some RNG drops, but it isn't necessary, and you'll probably just learn to breeze on by them since they aren't aggressive and won't engage unless you stick your nose in their face. We're also introduced to the ability to make and break camp at this point in the game. When you're on the continent, you can choose to set up a campsite where you can rest your characters, refill your supplies, and let the writers do what they probably call character development by dumping a whole 200 years worth of dialogue on the player all at once, because these characters just refuse to have any meaningful conversations anywhere that isn't at the camp. Your options aren't exactly varied, and yet they still take a fair bit of time. Eventually you can upgrade your weapons and supplies. You can adjust your stats and ability selection at the bonfire, expedition flag. You can talk to this guy who is bad with children, and you can talk to your fellow expeditioners. That last part, talking to your expeditioners, takes roughly 5 hours to complete for each time there's new information. First, you have to go to each expeditioner and exhaust their initial dialogue. After that is exhausted, you can choose to spend some time with them. This will trigger another scripted dialogue event where Gustav, or later, Verso, and his fellows will say things to one another. After doing that for all of the characters, you're left with the option to check up on everyone, which triggers a cutscene for more exposition or development or whatever. Then you can write in Gustav's journal if you want. And then you can sleep, assuming there isn't another checkup on everyone else, putting you back onto the continent for another day of character developmentless adventures. In the beginning of the game, this is bearable, but as you start to get exposed to the cringy writing style this game sometimes has, it can quickly become something that you do as a chore. They definitely made this stuff optional just because they knew a lot of players would dismiss this design choice as a, if you don't like it, then skip it kind of thing. But as we all should know, Saying that you can skip a thing in a game is not a defense of that thing, but an indictment altogether. But it's the early game, so right now, it's fine. In this first instance of camping, Gustav and Lune apologize for their schneeb-schnobbery. Gustav says that what happened at the beach wasn't Lune's fault. She says that it was because she convinced the expedition lead to land there. I get that Gustav is in a hurry because his sister is potentially in danger, but dude, say something to poor Luna. Christ. They argue for a bit. Gustav says fuck the mission.
Oh, fuck the mission!
And Lune convinces him to stay focused on the task at hand, reminding him that they used to say the future of Lumiere is more important than anyone's life. She asks if he still believes that, to which Gustav responds,
I hope I do.
This is a line bought with credit, not cash. That is to say, Sandfall can't afford Gustav saying something like this because there is nothing associated with his character that would ever in his life make him forget what the ultimate goal is. He is fully dedicated to seeing through the mission for those who come after. That is his entire thing. His life's work. His whole character. There is no reason to unjustly go after dramatic lines like this. It mars the Gustav that you're trying to create. Our duo move out the next day, traveling to Flying Waters as directed by the mysterious message. Since this world is open, you can technically go to a few places before heading to the Flying Waters, but honestly, any area that isn't part of the storyline directly is hit and miss with its balancing. So in my playthroughs, I would basically work through the story and then backtrack when I had upgraded my gear enough to make the optional fights less taxing. Flying Waters is direct evidence for and against Sandfall's merit in level design. I'd like you to consider these frames of Lune interacting with the wildlife. That fish looks like it's straight out of a PS2 game, while Lune, by stark contrast, looks just a bit more modern. The player, or the spectator, as a collection of viewers across any spectrum of artwork, is always aware of the composition, and even players who aren't actively thinking about it will have their subconscious affected over time when the art styles they are looking at are at odds with one another. And no, I don't mean at odds in an intentional way. This fish doesn't look like shit for the purposes of playing into the metaphor of polar opposites, but instead highlights a huge problem with Clair Obscur's ability to stay consistent. Sometimes landscapes look cool, sometimes they look like shit. Sometimes these characters look amazing. Other times, I can't tell what emotion is trying to communicate itself beneath the layers of stiffness. In the early game, the combat is new, exciting, and engaging. In the late game, it's a repetitive parry simulator that has almost zero space for tank or utility builds. And certain boss fights seem like they were designed to annoy more than to enhance an experience. Clair Obscur is rather inconsistent in any department that isn't the soundtrack, and I know that the soundtrack is part of the game, and I have to consider it altogether, but at the end of the day, for a game to be great, it can't just be a great album, can it? When moving through Flying Waters, the player will be introduced to these puzzles. Find 3 glowy orbs and shoot them. Get loot. You realize that this puzzle is just barely less engaging than the Petanque encounters, and those are designed like what you'd expect out of a GameCube title for 9-year-olds made 20 years ago. No, you're right. This is great. Yeah, no, you're right. My bad. Game of the year, CL Swimsuit. The loot tumor gives you loot and a pat on the back for being clever enough to solve its mystery. Also, a track that plays in Flying Waters is just so lovely. It's just so good. It makes me feel bad. It's so good. Our duo continues through the waters, taking a moment to rest at a bond flag. And here they can upgrade their attributes: Vitality, Might, Agility, Defense, and Luck. Vitality increases a character's HP. Might adds raw damage to a character's weapon and does nothing else. Agility increases a character's speed, which allows them to take more turns over the course of a fight. In some cases, this stat and its effects on speed can allow characters to naturally take 2 turns before their opponents are able to respond. Defense adds defense to your character. Of course, the higher the stat, the less damage you take. Although there has been some preliminary testing that I've seen on the math behind it, it's fairly inconsistent. Finally, we have Luck, which gives you a higher critical rating. But of course, all of these skills function a little less straightforward than you might expect. And what some people find to work for them is going to vary from person to person, of course, and especially so in the early game. But I have some anecdotally formed opinions on these things, so let's go over them in some detail. Vitality raises your HP. It's the most straightforward stat of them all, and if a character's weapon scales with Vitality, it also increases their weapon damage. I think having more HP in this game will feel nice on a first playthrough, but each playthrough thereafter, Vitality might feel like a waste. At level 99, the skill will grant a player just under 1,400 HP. A moderately leveled Pictos, for which a player can have up to 3 equipped at any given time, can easily grant 2,000 health, with fully leveled Picti providing upwards of 5k HP or more. Since Vitality doesn't splash into any other benefits, it really is a stat that serves the early game more than the late game. I actually think this is perfectly fine design. As a matter of fact, I welcome the change. For many of the bigger RPGs over the last 15 years, HP leveling has been the de facto strategy. More HP means more mistake allowance, and that means you really just level HP over other options until it stops scaling, or, if it doesn't stop scaling, forever. In Clair Obscur, its value as an early to mid-game mistake buffer is decent enough to warrant investing on its own, and feels nice paired with damage scaling when available, but doesn't extend its usefulness as a stat that you feel bad investing into might or other scaling attributes early as well. Might is a stat that is strictly used for buffing weapon damage. Every weapon in the game has intrinsic might scaling, and will gain more damage from might than any other stat until the weapons get upgraded sufficiently to make their two other attribute associations outclass might's natural value, which still scales decently well into the late game. The problem with might is that it doesn't affect any other stats for a character. Where other stats can have splash effects, such as defense levels also raising your crit chance, might doesn't affect anything other than weapon damage. Factor that in with the damage cap at 9,999 damage per swing, and suddenly investing into raw damage that will cap out until the game is just about over doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Much like Vitality, might should be capitalized on during the early game for experienced players who just want to get through their boss fights with as little parrying simulation as possible. I'd argue that in the very late game, you can reinvest into might once you get your other two preferred stats leveled, as a means to get the most damage possible out of your DPS characters, which functionally means all of your characters. Agility is not only what I'd argue is the best attribute in the early game, it's actually just the best attribute at all stages. Agility raises a character's defense stat just slightly. It's enough to help glass cannon characters not get one-tapped on some occasions, but honestly, that benefit doesn't matter really at all. The reason you level agility is because it provides your characters with raw speed. Speed is the single strongest stat in the game, and being derived from agility makes agility the strongest attribute by proxy. If you were playing through Expedition 33 and found that enemies were always taking their turns before you, that is because your speed stat was too low. In extreme cases, enemies will start taking 2 or even 3 turns before you're able to do anything. Leveling agility will naturally alleviate this problem. Leveling agility while also equipping speed-granting Pictai will invert this problem. When you can take 2 turns before your opponent takes even 1, you can effectively say that the agility attribute has doubled your damage, making it more valuable not only as a utility attribute, but also as a damage-based attribute, the likes of which might pales in comparison to. Of course, when you factor in AP and your ability to deal the same amount of damage 2 turns in a row, things become just a little more complicated. But the fact remains that when speed is king, agility is princely. And that attribute is by far the best available in any situation where you aren't messing up your parries. Which is why I found myself always reaching for weapons that scaled with agility, no matter the benefits they offered passively. Defense can be thought of as vitality, but for the late game. Where vitality raises your HP effectively early on, easily making you twice or thrice times tanky, defense will make you tankier later in the game by providing percentage damage reduction to opponents. The reduction has diminishing returns as your defense stat, not to be confused with your defense attribute, though this principle applies to both, grows. So as you gain more defense as a stat, you gain less and less benefit from it, but benefit all the same. The defensive applications also change depending on the enemy you are facing according to a formula presented by Quan Zaiden. Late game enemies will ignore more of your defense than early game enemies, as I understand his findings. The issue with defense, as well as vitality, is that the enemies you can effectively use defense against to gain a significant amount of safety net are enemies that are already easy to parry and deal minor damage anyway. The enemies you really need defense against are going to be the difficult bosses throughout the story and side areas of the map, and those bosses tend to kill you in 1 or 2 hits, regardless of what you do. There is an interesting interplay with this in that the boss's most difficult parries are often low damage quick hits. In effect, if you can't parry properly against the bosses that you want defense for, you're going to die to them regardless. And if you can parry against them, then good congratulations, you have the one mechanic that means you're invincible. You don't need defense or vitality. You are consistent enough against them that defensive stats actually put you at a disadvantage because you'll be dealing less damage to the boss as a result of having less offensive attributes. And where mistakes happen, revive supplies and abilities can pick up the slack. This is just another side effect of pairing being so good and prevalent as a strategy that the whole game needs to be balanced around it, thus making defensive stats, while still useful in some situations, generally underwhelming. Defense also raises your crit chance, which means that if all you need is a few percentages to guarantee 100% alongside some picto effects, then some levels invested into defense might be the way to go. Although luck would probably be more effective for such a thing. Speaking of which, luck. Luck has often been an attribute in RPGs associated with critical hits and unlikely, goofy feats of accomplishment. Since there aren't any situations to do anything outside of combat, like alternate dialogue choices spurned on by stat distribution, luck simply gives the player a healthy amount of crit chance and a little bit of speed. Critical hits provide the player with 50% extra damage, so having it is tantamount to gaining a quick time to kill, and sometimes clinching a fight without having to risk another round of parries. Some mechanics function in very engaging ways with crit, like with one of Lune's lightning skills outputting an extra attack upon landing a critical strike, after applying the 50% damage buff. So combining luck with high damage dealing abilities and pick die that gets you more speed and 100% crit chance can yield really broken results on lower damage but higher number of hits abilities, since those abilities will not lose damage efficiency because they don't reach the cap. At least not as easily as single target, one-hit abilities. I believe the best players of Expedition 33 will probably find that weapons that scale with agility and luck, or agility and defense, are the absolute best for efficient stat-based gameplay, where weapons that scale with vitality and defense are left by the wayside in a game that pretty much punishes anyone who isn't only focused on offensive gameplay by making everything take that much longer, even when playing perfectly. And there we have the attribute system. I honestly feel it's kind of underwhelming, and is completely outshined by the sheer value provided by pick die. As I've said, even 99 vitality is outclassed by one semi-decent picto. Might look satisfying since it's scaled better than the other stats for the majority of the game in terms of raw numbers, but is actually just a third, sometimes second best option for DPS until the very, very late game when all you really need is a little more damage for the sake of it. Agility is obviously very good, and doubly so when paired next to its peers on the attribute table, but it doesn't feel very interesting to invest in since there's really no other option past the mid-game, aside from a few levels in vitality, if you're just trying to take it easy, and beyond that, there's really no other best choice late, either. Defense can be somewhat effective at winning players an extra turn or two in the late game, but as an attribute, again, pick die can pretty much do its job more effectively, and without stealing levels from luck or agility. And luck is a decent attribute by virtue of crit chance functioning in a very binary way when it really matters. I believe there were more than a few missed opportunities to make these attributes have more meaning. It's probably apparent at this point that I think parrying shouldn't have been a mechanic made available to all characters at all times, and I think one interesting change that could have been made was to make the max number of parries allotted to a character per turn tied to their defense stat. Defensively oriented players would be allowed to negate more damage, where the nimble, offensively minded characters would need support from other party members and healing sources to survive an onslaught before being able to dish out their damage. Vitality could have effects on curses and stuns a character suffers, while luck could play a role in determining drop chance, value, and upgrade quality as battle loot. Assuming there isn't anything working under the hood that I don't know about, which there almost certainly is, I'm quite certain there's nothing like this in Expedition 33. But of course, as I write this out, all of these facets of gameplay would probably have required more forethought for a system that just wasn't wielding enough depth to warrant the time required to make these kinds of things work in a meaningful way. Certainly, giving characters a cap on their parries per turn would flip the game's balance way out of whack, even before considering the chef. Lune and Gustav finish up at the flag fire and approach a door in a hut, as described by the mysterious note. Entering, they find the manor, and someone watches on. The manor acts as the central hub that connects a lot of the areas of the game. The manor is decorated with artworks both foreign and familiar. A symmetrical design makes the structure stand out in a world that is otherwise abstract. Expressionism, combined with a realism marred with an off-putting, unnatural variance. Almost to suggest that the manor is something not wholly of the world that the expeditioners are a part of. They find Mael at a study, upstairs on the left of the foyer. Gustav takes a moment to do his "I'm overwhelmed with guilt" apology.
I'm sorry. I thought that you... On the beach, I saw you, and I couldn't, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have, I should have come for you, and
And I'm not saying I dislike Charlie Cox, the English voice actor for Gustav, but this take was piss flat, and there are actually a number of these takes that just don't quite work. It isn't specific to any one character either, so I think the editors who threw all of these cutscenes together might just have a timing problem? I think the writers have a tonal problem that didn't get fixed, and I think the directors had a vision for what a scene was supposed to be that wasn't agile enough to change when something didn't work. I'm not really sure who's to blame. All I know is that this game misses its target sometimes when it feels like doing less would have helped them to stick the landing. Also, they made Mael look like a plastic surgery bot in the scene. Change her back. The three discuss how Mael ended up in the manor, and she introduces them to the curator, a mysterious being that, for some reason, is friendly. He agrees to accompany them on their trip, and at this point the player will be able to upgrade their weapons and supplies with him when camping. And Mael states that he even helped her upgrade her pick die. I don't know why the devs made her say that, because she doesn't have any upgraded pick die in her inventory when she joins the group. She doesn't have any pick die at all, actually, so the line is misleading. Also, yes, I will be using the incorrect plural form of Pictos moving forward. It sounds better and less disgusting. Get over it. Why they didn't change the line to her just saying that the curator upgraded her weapon, I have no idea. They could have given Mael's rapier level 2 by default and that would have been the end of it. This is a problem because the dialogue suggests mechanics that do not exist. Obviously, her not having a Picto is annoying, but that's minor. The bigger issue is that Mael suggests that he can upgrade pick die as a mechanic, which might confuse players who approach him at camp, suspecting that there is an option to do so that they are missing. To add insult to this mistake, and to double up on my suspicions that the devs just couldn't change an idea for the game once they put any work at all into it, Mael repeats this idea later in the game right in front of the curator.
Surprised to find you here.
I hope we can trust him.
Well, at least we can upgrade our Pictos.
Suggesting that the ability to upgrade pick die was a feature that got scrapped, maybe to rebalance the resource economy, but they just never took it out of the lines relating to it. It's amateur. And I know you can upgrade pick die, but you do that through combat, and it doesn't appear the curator is at all a part of that, so either the game's dialogue is misleading or it's wrong in either case. Anyway, at this point, Mael is part of the group, and you can begin leveling her and selecting her skills. She features a flame-centric lineup on the left, a more traditional physical damage lineup on the right, and some interesting experimentation abilities down the center. In general, the characters' strengths and weaknesses seem to have more to do with their roles in the narrative more than they have to do with balance. And Mael starts out decently strong at default, but quickly becomes wildly stronger than any other character in the game and stays there. I felt like maybe I just wasn't figuring out the other characters at first, but after playing through the game more than a couple times, it makes perfect sense from a narrative perspective. I feel the character balance is a bit eccentric, but perfect for what this game cares most about. The gang take on the curator in a training exercise, and the jump counter is introduced. Some moves, instead of demanding a parry or a dodge, will demand a jump. They tend to be the easiest moves in the game, and they offer you a chance to send back damage as a reward for successfully navigating them. There's nothing much to it aside from the fact that their telegraphs can be a little hard to judge sometimes, but once you get the timing down even barely, you can do them in your sleep. During the fight, the player is introduced to Mael's mechanics. Her abilities, on top of their effects and damage, put her in different stances. In an offensive stance, she takes and deals 50% more damage. In defensive, she takes 50% less, which is nuts. And she gains an extra AP per parry. Her best stance, Virtuose, makes her deal 200% damage with no downsides. Even in a game that doesn't punish players for taking into defensive strategies, Virtuose would stand as an insanely strong alternative to the other stances. In this game, which does punish defensive builds, it is easily one of the most OP things available. If you can get into Virtuose stance, your best bet is to stay there for as long as possible by spamming free aim shots and using the Mezzo Forte ability to re-enable Virtuose and gain AP back. In Virtuose, at any point prior to the endgame, your free aim shots will deal more damage than any ability will allow for thanks to the damage cap. There is zero reason, once you think about the mathematics at all, to do anything else unless you're trying to stack fire or stun against bosses, who have large enough HP pools to warrant stacking bonuses against. The Boomerang Gang defeat the Curator and leave the manor. Outside, they run into Noko, and thus the player is introduced to Gestrels. Almost every single one of these fucking things can go burn in hell. They are so annoying.
So the tales are true.
Oh, but Everett, it's part of the structure. There is a narrative reason for them to be so annoying. Yeah, I know. I don't care why they suck. They just suck. Each one has that sort of Jar Jar Binks vibe to them. Silly, goofy, silly, right guys? Are there adult human beings who ever found these things cute? I mean, even the voice actors are clearly just French adults, which is gross enough already, trying to do baby voices. Doubly gross. It's doubly gross, doubly annoying. I wish that dueling the Gestrel merchants just gave you all of their items and they died as a result. No river rebirth for you. I laughed when Noko got one-tapped by Renoir. I laughed. Just kidding, they're so funny and cute. Look how Noko mentions Verso and nobody bothers to ask what he's talking about. Haha, cutesy wootsy, stupid ass, beat the fuck out of you. Lune's inquisitive mind is sparked alive by the realization that gestrels, which everyone in Lumiere assumed to be mythical creatures of fiction, are real. Mael informs her that their village isn't far from their current location. So for real, like 1 hour ago, Lune was considering just abandoning Mael to whatever forces kidnapped her for God knows what purposes because she wanted to focus on the mission. And now she's being shown in conflict between going on a goofy adventure or continuing on with the mission. Did somebody on the writing team hate the voice actress for Lune? I have no problem with this scene showcasing Lune's personality, but the tiny things matter. And the fact that she was not only considering, but preferring to leave Mael behind just recently, and is now requiring Gustav to pull her out of internal conflict over this childish ass plotline makes her seem like a piece of shit. This is why I care so much about the little things. That scene over the mysterious message laid a foundation for Lune's character that would, time and again, become betrayed by her behavior later in the game. And frankly, I actually prefer this behavior. The way she reacts to hearing about the Gestral village and puts her hands together with that big old smile is very cute and gives her an endearing element, assuming you aren't paying attention to how she was behaving before. But I don't think the writers intended for that message scene to suggest what it does suggest. I actually don't think they thought about it very hard at all. They needed a slight bit of tension and just threw in the most obvious form of it without considering how it reflected Lune's confused disinterest in saving her fellow expeditioners, and how that makes her seem a little psychotic when paired next to her willingness to abandon the mission for a mythical adventure. Noko can be traded with, being the merchant he is, upgrade materials, colors of Lumina, and fight the merchant. Some merchants can be fought to unlock their secret items. Some items they offer are neat, others are whatever. They're usually picti or weapons. The real reward is being able to satisfy your sense of sadism through the physical abuse of gestrels. Our trio continues through the upside down wateries, fighting Neverons and mine holders and the like. Lune sees a rather large anchor and says,
That anchor doesn't look man-made.
Really, Sandfall? The anchor doesn't look man-made. These characters come from a world where you can walk through upside-downable water, an Eiffel Tower impossibly leans to the right in the distance, objects float on their own, and the people from Lumiere have access to tech that can create objects out of thin air by defying physics. Lune herself can fly, but the anchor doesn't look man-made. It's too surreal, this anchor. Are these characters from this world, or are they supposed to mirror our expectations for reality, Sandfall? Pick one. Mael happens upon a white mine wielder. Much akin to the lamplight wielder of yore, this Neveron seems to have been created for the purposes of good, not evil. Mael picks up a mine and gives it to the wielder. He says, "Oh," and Mael is surprised at his guttural schnobbery. There isn't as much to go on with this guy as the lamp wielder, but the theme remains to suggest that there is something else to these creatures we're not understanding as we slaughter them left to right. Although later you do come to find there is a difference to the white Neverons and the normal Neverons you come across, although we will access that part of the story later. Our trio happens upon a Neveron fishy foraging for something. Lune, in keeping with her themes of being a smart character who consistently behaves like a moron, says this.
It's forging something. So they have intelligence.
Lune, you just had a conversation with one not 2 hours ago. You know they have intelligence, unlike you. You, who consistently does things that don't make sense. This is why that dumb anchor line is in the game, by the way. All of the anchors around this blacksmith suggest that this guy made them and the one Lune remarked on. And look at that, she's putting the pieces together. Intellect. Feet. The Flying Waters features a build-up to the final boss with a chromatic troubadour and Burgeon. The former will test a player's parry abilities in a way nothing has yet, and the latter will test their patience. A pillar with old newspaper pages tagged all around it is shown atop rocky outcrops, which jut from the mist-shrouded lake of Liurnia. Some of their titles read, Garbage is Burying the City, and The Expedition, a Success? This image of a painting lady is seen many times with the expedition, or the title called Exposure, containing Come and Discover the Works, a foreshadowing of our little collection of expeditioners in their quest to find the meaning behind this chromatic world. One newspaper is covered, but I theorize it says Neverons, Menace? Though I could be very wrong about that. Below that title, the text, partially covered, reads, To Cross the Barrier. We will come to find out who created the Neverons, and why, but for this portion of the game, these tiny details breathe some life, not just into the characters we play, but the civilization from which they are from. It's nice to see that some thought was put into depicting how humanity was reacting to events approaching the shattering. The scattering. The fracture. Flying Waters finishes with a boss fight against Goblu. The trio enters an open ocean bed. A lone rose stems from the center. Gustav approaches, with the red rose reminding him of his Aya Sophie. He considered her rigid, plasticky face. How many? He thinks to himself. How many other men must have contributed to that rose necklace of hers before she took mine? The thought alone makes him feel a grand sense of embarrassment for ever having been Twitter-pated with such a loose hussy. Goblu attacks! The boss fight is fine. Goblin doesn't do anything interesting mechanically, and we're at the point where just about every fight in the game will feel like the last and the one to come thereafter, courtesy of the R1 dependency. Flying Waters is the first location in the game where the developers really tried to start leaning into environmental storytelling during gameplay, and where the character development begins to take place somewhere that isn't at camp. As we'll come to find, the more shallow portions of this game can probably point to why that development just wasn't enough to prevent most of it from taking place at camp, both at this point in the game and for the rest of it. The real treat is being able to get Mael into your party, who makes all the fights much, much quicker than they otherwise would be. Leaving the Flying Waters, we're treated to Mael's nightmare. In the time period Lumiere is in when the 33rd expedition left, they hadn't yet invented colored dreaming, so we just have to deal with this palette. The nightmare features a Verso who looks down and forward with his hair. Mael clutches a thing and yelps. Ow, ow, ow.
I've been having nightmares.
Yeah, me too.
I dislike that a lot of the plotline is kept secret from the player by not having a single character ask even remotely relevant questions when it would make sense to do so. Mael should want to talk about the strange man in her dreams, and given the strangeness of the world these characters inhabit, the group should want to take her dreams seriously as something that may or may not mean anything at all. Imagine if Mael had given a vivid description of Verso before he met with the Quad Squad. Lune and CL, at the very least, would be far more suspicious of his trustworthiness and wouldn't have just let him into the group as easily. At least, I don't think so. I suppose we can't know, because Mael just refuses to go into detail about what she's been seeing.
If death approaches, I want you to run. No, promise me. Run. Especially if we meet the man from the beach. We can't face him. You see him, you run.
Only if you do the same.
Oh, I'm running as soon as I see a strand of white hair, trust me.
Gustav has apparently forgotten all about the nature of the mission they're on. While I understand his reasoning that they can't fight the man from the beach, he keeps talking to and about Mael like her and his temporary, short lives are more important than the success of the mission. Mael joined up with the expedition knowing what she was getting into and why, and Gustav allowed it. Him behaving this way cheapens his character because, one, it makes no sense. If the mission fails, Mael is fucked. If it fails and she lives, she's fucked and alone until her miserable gamage. So telling her to revolve her actions purely around temporary survival and not the mission is just dumb. It is an exceptionally stupid thing for Gustav, of all people, to be doing. Second, Gustav's character has up until recently been all about sacrifice. He believes in giving his life and his work as an engineer for the future of Lumiere, for those who come after. But I guess now he believes that, but not at the cost of his sister-daughter thing. So he's being dumb, and he's not sticking to his principles. I mean, he might as well just tell Mael to run if she sees the paintress as well, shouldn't he? As far as he's aware, she's been killing them from across 2 seas without any effort, where the old man on the beach had to at least lift his hands up at a close distance. Come on. I know it seems like I'm reading too much into this, but that's kind of the point. The writing does not hold up to careful inspection. These characters are choosing to not say the right thing, are choosing to say dumb things, and are behaving in ways that betray the content of their character the writers would like to think they've given them. The village of Jestrels is guarded by a great door. Getting around it means running through the ancient sanctuary. At its entrance, we have our first Petanque encounter. The Petanques are Petanki, and obtaining their rewards means figuring out how to deal enough DPS to kill them before they flee. Once they flee, they're gone until you reload their save, which I think is either an oversight or an intended feature to make sure you have more than one chance to take them on. The thing is, I don't think a blind player would bother to check if reloading the game would make them respawn. I certainly didn't. It seems more like the Petanque encounters were designed to be 1 tries only initially, then changed to be as many tries as you like, which took away from the punitive feeling they seem to be designed around. So Sandfall made it a half and half situation by letting them be tried twice as long as someone queued you in before the encounter to exit the game if you fail. I mentioned the pets earlier in this review. They are the closest thing this game has to a proper puzzle. First, you get the pets to their location, then you fight them. Getting them to their location is not difficult, a little more tedious than anything. Fighting them can be difficult if you don't know what makes them tick, but that's just a matter of experimentation. Landing parries and stunning them can buy you more time to dish out the damage, and if you're leveling your characters and their gear properly, you'll have more than enough to dispose of them quickly. Their rewards are generous, and that is all there is to say about the Petanques. Beyond the Petanque is some loot off the beaten path. To get to it, you need to cross a crevasse between the sides of the cliffs. The Climbers Expedition laid out these little handholdies for the expeditions that would come after. I get that we couldn't expect Lumiere to have access to the same technology across nearly 70 years of expeditions, but in terms of gameplay, this inclusion of the handholdies really just annoys me. We have access to tech that can zip us around quickly and easily, but sometimes you have to use Sandfall's clunky climbing mechanics to move around certain areas, not because it makes sense, but because the writers wanted to world build.
Someone came here before and set up these handholds.
Probably Expedition 69. The Climbers Expedition.
Let us thank them for that.
Two things. First, why would an entire expedition be made up of one particular kind of person? Why would an entire generation of people volunteering be made up of climbers, and the next aviators, or shipbuilders, or anything like that? For that to work, you'd have to train an entire generation of people to do only the one thing. That, or get a group of people together and tell them that they're all, suddenly, going to be climbers for their expedition, instead of whatever they happen to be. No wonder these expeditions haven't worked yet. You're making everyone do one single thing, Lumiere. So the world building doesn't work in that sense, but also I can't help but feel that Sandfall only introduced this because they couldn't get the zipline function to work in certain areas, so they made these handholdies and then placed in lore after the fact to justify their existence. It makes any part of the game with them, even if for a small amount of time, tedious. There's no gameplay here that works in favor of the player. I would have preferred fewer or no handholdies at all and no world building to go along with it in the form of Expedition 69. Our group finds a young boy stood against the backdrop of a cliffside overlooking a massive gestural carving. The Inkly Ghost boy recognizes that we're a new expedition, which means that he's interacting with our world in real time. He also recognizes that we're Expedition 33, which means he is keeping count. His memory is failing him as he tries to remember what he is when he is asked. The names beginning with Ray and Clay come to mind, but he can't quite put them together. We'll later come to learn that he's remembering his father and sister in Renoir and Clea. The boy, a fragment of Verso's soul, as a key ingredient keeping this world together. Just as a reminder, if you haven't played this game, sorry, but this review is not going to make much sense to you. This encounter is the first of many with Verso's soul, and represents the nuanced attempt to tell the story in vague messaging. Where our group, failing to ask the right question in situations where they have no good reason not to, shows weak writing methodology, the boy failing to remember correct or full answers represents what I'd consider at least better storytelling. The characters can and do ask him reasonable questions, since the writers can refuse to answer them through justified means. The French division continue on through the Sanctuary, eventually stumbling into a Sacapatat, the Gestral's invention for fighting. The Gestrals are obsessed with fighting, and thus they've created a culture where they try to make fighting machines. That is their whole thing, aside from just being so annoying. Mael comments.
I don't see
I
any.
think they mean us.
They must be Gestrals. They're cute, but they're idiots.
She's only met one, right? How would she know that they're all idiots? A bit prejudiced, if you ask me. And she's right to be that way. The fights with the sacks of potatoes are some of the most satisfying in the game, if you can believe that. Not just because you get to beat up on Gestrals. No, I think it's got something to do with the fact that Sandfall had this idea to make all Gestral fights straightforward to encompass a simplistic, foolish energy that you might associate with a brute, or Gestral. And that had the effect of making all Sacapatat fights fun to read. Parrying against them feels nice. Interacting with their weak points via the free aim system works very, very well, usually. And their accidental little Sudoku attack after you defeated them feels on theme with Gestral nonsense. I don't know, I like fighting them. Listening to them, that's quite a different story, isn't it? There's quite a few of those fights moving from the Sanctuary towards the Gestral village, and they're fine. What do you want from me? The boss fight just before the village is against a Sacapatat as well.
They sound like kids.
No, Gustav, they don't sound like kids. They sound like adult French people trying to talk like kids with a made-up, silly-willy language. It's disgusting, and that country must be wiped from the earth so that we may survive. It is the same as all of the others, but for a cannon attack. The music played during this fight makes me want to drink lemonade on a beach. I will say that getting through its shield Bolshevik can be a bit of a slog, but that's probably my fault. We should discuss the nature of the little Patat Gestrals and why they're designed the way they are. We know that Verso, who our gang has not met yet, created the Gestrals when he was but a pup. That's why they look so crudely painted over and haphazardly attached by their limbs. The thing is, as annoying as they are, I'm not certain how I would change them to be less obnoxious, aside from just making their voice lines less abrasive. Make it less obvious, for example, that their lines are nothing more than grown men sitting in a studio talking in a way that should get them thrown into prison. That one change and they work perfectly fine. Even the adult gestrels, who can't help but sling slurs around, work better than the baby patates. The little patat notes on the group's strength and leads them to meet Chef Golgra. Get it? Get it? Chef? Because it's chief misspelled? I don't know if this is a lost in translation thing, but chief is actually spelled correctly on their signs, even if the legibility is poor. So the joke doesn't work once you realize Verso didn't mess up that bad, the poor lad. Before going to the chef, you can take some time to explore the gestural village, and the limitations of the game's scope are represented in what you can accomplish here. Speak to NPCs for a quip or two, get a cosmetic, get a pictos or two, and access a new room for the manor. There's nothing wrong with a game having a limited scope, but it does cause the sheer size of this village to beg for a little more flesh. And like most things in Clair Obscur, a little less unnecessary time wasting to accomplish what you need to do. Getting this gestural down requires you scale up these walls and traverse across them. If you find this gestural before speaking to the adult gestural below, he'll refuse to come down. Drop down, talk to the adult, and then scale the walls once more to get the gestural down. A little time wasty for next to nothing, if you ask me. This entire area is themed as a casino because you can get the roulette picto from it. 50% chance to deal half or double damage. It may boggle the mind's intuition to know that this does not, on average, keep your damage the same over time. If you deal 10 damage per swing over 6 swings, but half of them deal 5 and half of them deal 20, as roulette is likely to make happen, you deal a total of 75 damage for a 25% damage increase. Of course, this gets a little weird because what really matters is how many turns you can take to get a boss down, and factoring in the arbitrary damage cap, that double damage is often worthless. But I'm losing track of what matters, let me digress. My point is that the casino area is almost wholly dedicated to this one little picto, and that summarizes a lot about Clair Obscur. A whole lot of show for very little actual gameplay. Noko had informed us that there is yet another sea separating our party from the paintress, but the headmaster chef could help us across it. She states that since we do not have a ship, our best bet is Esquier, the mythical creature of yore. Lune is taken aback, and the chef says that to get to Esquire, we'll need to defeat her finest warriors to prove our strength. So it's off to the tournament. The structure of the tournament is a series of 1v1s, and your best bet, for multiple reasons, is to use Mael all the way through. For one thing, her stances increase the damage of parries, which can help you win the fights in 1 or 2 turns. More importantly though, is that the final fight of the tourney rewards the winner with a special weapon unique to their character, and Mael's is pretty much just insane. And trust me, you do not want to have to beat Chef after losing the tourney to get the rapier after the fact. All of the fights leading up to the final are more gestural brawlers. Very fun. The final introduces CL, a self-insert for whichever woman on the writing staff is unhealthily obsessed with tarot card readings, assuming there's only one, which I doubt. CL spent her time post-Old Man Annihilation fighting in the arena for the gestrals after one of them guided her to the village. It's touched on briefly in a future camp dialogue that she was probably just going to spend the rest of her days in the village fighting because it was fun. Apparently, not everyone on the expedition was as much a selective ideologue as Gustav when it comes to defeating the paintress. Her attacks aren't very strong, and it's rather easy to defeat her with Mael, even if you can't intuit the parry timings. Upon a victory, Mael, or whoever you fought with, does a cool little Smash Bros. Victory screen, and even the music reminds of N64-esque fighting games. Like, this is pretty neat, and most certainly intentional. Sandfall's cultural strength as video game developers showing quite strongly in things like this. The crew catch up with one another and then go visit Chef Golgra to get Mael's reward and the password to reach Esquier. Get out of my way! So that they may cross the sea. Mael's reward, Medallum. We're not going to go through any more weapons in specific, but we got to talk about this one because it is, in its own right, evidence that the developers know what is useful in their game stat-wise and what isn't. The first thing that sticks out to me is the damage type. Physical. Mael has natural fire damage unlocked through the left side of her tree. Subjectively, this left side is the most natural way to play the game, since the burn the abilities here use against opponents leaves sizable damage on a per-turn basis, helping you overcome the damage cap and giving you a greater advantage against opponents who might take multiple hits. The physical damage of Medallum means that some of your abilities and all of your parries will deal physical, leaving Mael open to dealing 2 types of damage. So in that way, there is versatility. Most people would have become accustomed to leaning on Lune for elemental damage, and this versatility ensures there's no fight against fire-resistant enemies where the options are too cramped, even though you should be using the lightning build with Lune, again, subjectively. Secondly, the stats for Medallum scale off of defense and agility. Now, I still believe that luck is better than defense in ideal situations until the very late game when defense takes over. But assuming that your pick die will get you to 100% crit eventually, your late game will scale much, much better with defense than luck. And as we've discussed, leveling agility is pretty much the one thing you should for sure be doing if you want to help yourself in the early, mid, and late game. So, Medallum's scaling is assigned to the best stat in the game in agility, and the stat that becomes second best in the late game. Fantastic. It's already a great weapon on these attributes alone, but then we look at the passives. At level 4, Medallum will start Mael in Virtuose stance. If you remember, Virtuose grants Mael double damage with no downsides. In every situation, this is the single most powerful effect available to her. All of her parries are now doubly effective until reaching the damage cap, and her first hits are twice as strong. In smaller encounters, this also affects her free aim strikes, which helps to end tedious encounters quickly. This has the knock-on effect of ensuring that you don't take damage in these encounters, earning the player an extra 20% XP per fight, which in turn helps to snowball the characters into stronger versions of themselves, which makes each encounter easier, which helps to snowball, and so on, and so on. All of this is ensured through Medallum, even for a first-time player. At level 10, each burn applied is doubled while in Virtuose stance, so her fire abilities are guaranteed to reach tick damage that caps at 10k. Very, very useful against bosses, since the time it takes to kill them directly correlates to how many caps you can hit on them per turn, because remember, it doesn't matter if you find a build for the abilities that have one massive damage hit. They all deal 10k. So they are all measured in how many swings they have, and every fire ability has at least one extra hit attached to them by default, and Medallum doubles the efficacy of long-term boss fights in this regard. At level 20, burns deal double damage, which doesn't matter at all, because at this point Mael is a paintress who is gommaging things. Actually, that level 20 ability I think is intentionally unremarkable. I remember thinking in my first playthrough, fire, Mael, canvas. I think Mael will defeat the paintress by burning down the canvas. I'm not saying every ability in the game was made to misdirect the player from seeing the story ahead of time, but this level 20 effect, I'm not so sure. One of the best weapons for Mael, arguably the best outright when you see how easily it can carry you through to the late game. Chef gives us the password, and we're off to find Esquier. Esquier is another one of Verso's creations, and much like the Gestrels we've come across, he obeys the laws of nature assigned to him by a child. So he's ultra powerful, but can only use his power when he has access to ancient stones. And one of those stones gives him the power, arbitrarily, to carry our group across the sea. Again, it's arbitrary. It doesn't actually do anything in-universe to Esquier to have these rocks, but he was made by a child, so it's supposed to be a game of make-believe. Esquier takes a particular interest in Ciel, who somehow has a strange connection to him in return. I'm jumping ahead here, but I'd like to talk about this. All of the beings in the canvas have some connection to the family member that created them, directly or otherwise. Mael says she doesn't know if Gustave is her brother or her father, and that's because pieces of Verso and Renoir, somewhere, are in what make him whole. Esquier recognizes Ciel because there is some connection between Verso's creations and whatever makes Ciel whole. I mean, literally he recognizes her because Ciel tried to kill herself by swimming out into the sea after her husband passed. He found her, flew her back to Lumiere, and although she doesn't remember how she got back, he does. But metaphorically, they have this connection because of the souls imprinted in their being. Verso and Esquier, and I believe Aline, his mother, and Ciel. We know how Esquier recognizes her, but how Ciel has this connection to him is explained by my theory here. And consider Ciel's backstory. Her husband passing would be a thinly threaded effect of what's happening with Aline directly as she moves further and further away from her husband, Renoir, outside of the canvas. The loss of their bond is represented in a similar outcome for what creations have her soul implanted. Maybe it's intentional, maybe I'm grasping at straws, or maybe it's obvious because it was explained outright in something that I've missed, in which case this whole section is driving people nuts, but I don't care if I'm wrong, because I like it. The gang gets Esquier's swimming rock back by defeating François.
So, not only are you intruding, you're here to steal? Oh my word, humans! Well, over my dead body! Rah!
The dialogue here reminds me of old school RuneScape, believe it or not, just like everything else, I suppose. Very clever, tongue-in-cheek. Is it just me? Back at camp, the group talks about Esquier's arrival. Gustave takes an opportunity to talk to Ciel just so that he can tell her, hey, I tried to kill myself.
After the beach, when I was alone, I almost...
I know.
Luna told you?
No, but I could fill in the blanks. And I understand. Better than anyone. You know that?
Are you actually a child or what? He was going to kill himself because he was overwhelmed with the death around him. He knew what he was signing up for, and instead of moving beyond it, he's taking time just to tell a girl that he tried to off himself with a really cool looking gun. Childish. Oh, but Everett, you say, don't you think it's good for him to unpack his inner spaces, his feelings, and cry about something he very selfishly made the decision to do before his expedition mate smacked it out of him? No, but I do think this game was written to appeal to people who think like that. Or who, unironically, talk like that. The same people who enjoy childish, immature romance in their games, I consider these things to be strictly linked. CL responds by alluding to her attempt on her own life via saltwater and lets Goose know that she understands better than anyone. I just gotta say, I feel like if you try to kill yourself and fail, you're unreasonably bad at it. Of all the people to try and end, your own self has to be the easiest target, and you're losing against nothing. If you failed at it, I suspect your heart wasn't in it. Believe in yourself and give it another go. The collection of Schneebs decide to move towards the Stonewall Cliffs to gain access to the northern coast before moving out to the Paintress. During the night, Mael, unbeknownst to all, is visited in spirit by Painted Alicia, a creation of Mother Aline after her Verso, her son, died in a fire caused by the Riders, and indirectly caused by Alicia. The Painted family, collectively, resemble the Descendre family, but only insofar as Aline would project them, which in this case creates cataclysmic differences in the broader picture between the actual Descendre family and their painted doppelgangers, but only in specific areas. Renoir, for example, placing above all else the health of Aline, while Painted Renoir is happy, perfectly happy, to let Aline continue to stay within the canvas to protect his family from annihilation at Renoir's hand. Painted Alicia waxes poetic about those who know not that they are not, a phrase that alludes to the creations within the canvas that do not know that their lives, if they are indeed alive, are absolute fabrications. These beings don't have to contend with the fact that their lives simply aren't real, but the imaginative creations of humans in another world. In contrast, the Painted family are not only aware of this fact, but are also immortal, which means they can't escape it, which is the main source of Verso's motivation for allowing Renoir to destroy the canvas. We're jumping around with characters, but I did tell you to play the game first, so your fault if you can't follow. Heading out, the Schneebs happen upon a gestural beach, which are beaches reserved for gestural shenanigans, platformers, and a volleyball thing. You know those infinite climb games you've seen streamers play but haven't subjected yourself to? Yeah, like those, but probably honestly worse. I felt compelled to do them because... yeah. They give outfit rewards. Dog shit. We don't need to talk about these things anymore. You guys have seen them. Just don't include them next time, please, Sandfall, or make them less platformy, less floaty. You know? One or the other, Sandfall. Either make them better or don't include them. Entering the Stonewall Cliffies, CL remarks upon a creation of the past, now destroyed. A Ferris wheel.
Apparently, that was where people went on dates, you know? What do you think happened in those cabins?
I once asked a girl out in one. CL, I was 11 years old. She said yes, and then we both sat there in silence and never, not once ever, spoke again.
Goose, I can feel it!
Come on, you can fly. Can't you get Flurry yourself?
Oh no, too much effort.
So, wait. Esquire is that powerful?
Apparently so, but also lazy.
Gustav's reaction annoys me so much here. From his perspective, he is on a desperate quest to save humanity and restore the natural cycle of life for both future generations and his sister, and himself, and his friends. This is a dire situation. Yet this new friend of his just one-tapped a giant monster that would take his crew like an hour of parrying to kill. And he's just like, haha, that's so crazy. This should be a monumental discovery. Figure out how to get Esquire to kill the Paintress. Ask him where his Paintress cunt Slamrock is or something. Like, try. Nobody tries. They just ignore the fact that he's the strongest entity in the whole world. Fuck you, Gustav. This is why you were executed in front of your daughter thing. You can find a journal within the Stone Wallaby Ways that details a woman's thoughts, a woman who captured Painted Alicia. Now, Alicia can't talk because she was painted to resemble a girl who was severely burned and can't talk. But the woman thinks she's just refusing to speak. The woman details how she's going to, quote, make her talk and then feed her to a Nevron, and I didn't find any info following up on that, but I do really feel bad for Painted Alicia and definitely understand why she seemed to be more on Verso's side when it came to ending the canvas and ending her own life. The concept of eternal life never looked so much like hell, except of course to a thinking man it always does. The 42 Wallaby Ways conclude with a fight against Lampmaster. A Lampmaster or the Lampmaster? The crew smack him up easy. Mael jinxes the party, resulting in a second phase. Oh, the flashbacks. The second phase is just as easy though. Ciel finds a Flory and Esquier sucks it up. He can now swim with other people on top of him. Hurrah!
Just jump, mes amis. It's not that high.
The devs did not bother editing the environment to make it possible for them to actually jump from here. Everyone will splat if they attempt it, except for Ciel, who will be protected by her outrageous astuteness for carrot card reading. Ciel and Luna go to Esquier, while Mael and Chimichanga hang behind and toss rocks for the sake of plot development. As Gustav searches for a rock at Mael's behest, Painted Renoir appears in dramatic fashion. Gustav is surprised shot in the back by a laser, and Mael is held in escrow. The Lampmaster is resurrected for a third time to hold Esquier in place, so I think that means the Lampmaster is stronger than Esquier, but I'm not sure. 50% stronger than Jesus, by the way. Mael asks of Gustav that he run. He shakes his head no, which means he was lying about running from the white hair all along, and was just trying to look out for his sister-daughter, and isn't that cute? I like the scene. To be fair, it's not like running was going to do much at this point anyway. Painted Renoir, clearly capable of killing Stavros, decides to toy with him. I'm not sure if this means that real Renoir is sadistic, or if that Aline's opinion of real Renoir is rather negative, and so her creation has this unfortunate attribute in him, but honestly I think it kind of cheapens both Renoir and Painted Renoir to have him stand here and toy with Gustav like that. They both go from being two men concerned with protecting their families to, maybe, a little immoral for no reason, The reason Gustav is forced to go through this is to show that his tech is strong enough to smack Renoir away, technically killing him until his eventual revive, about as close to a metaphor for a man just about reaching the height of the gods. In this case, technologically interacting with Chroma being the mastering of some spiritual plane, at least in Gustav's world. Gustav is dismantled and Painted Renoir attempts to send Mael back into her world as Alicia.
This is a kindness, not a cruelty.
You let her come. You know she's too weak for this. How could you let her take such a risk?
You only care when things are right in front of you. My sweet child, you were supposed to stay home. I told you not to worry. But since you're here now, just stay put.
What are you saying? You must go home, now. This does not involve you.
When this is over, we'll go home together.
No!
Renoir, actual Renoir, sends Alicia back to be Mael, presumably because he knows she'll increase the chances that the paintress weakens enough to allow Renoir to destroy the canvas whole. Painted Renoir can't have that, because as long as the paintress is painting and the canvas unmolested by Renoir, his family survives. So, naturally, he lifts his sword up to crack his half-daughter in the face. Just in time, Verso pulls a reverso. Who is this man? Everyone who's playing for the first time asks. Verso tilts his head forward with hair and looks at Mael with eyes that are very uncomfortable until you learn that he's her older brother. The Painted family have a little chit-chat about what to do, and the gang sans Gustav hop on Esquier and run like hell. I guess that means Luna and Ciel manage well enough with the Lampmaster, despite only being 2.5. Back at camp, Luna behaves quite normally for a moment, then begins having what the writers probably wanted to be a mental breakdown.
The plan doesn't change. We aim for the monolith. We keep heading north. With Esquier's help, we can make it. But we lost the Lumina converter, so...
It's okay, we can think about that later.
All the backups were destroyed by that man, but Expedition 32 will bring more. Their chances will be better. We need to prepare them. I should update our journals.
Hey, could you guys have recorded that one more time? Maybe with a hint of emotion, please? and animate her face to do more than tilt left to right. I'm not convinced, Sandfall. Verso, apparently part of the group now, approaches Mael to console her. Esquire can swim now, which means we get to hear him talk like an autistic Build-A-Bear made to sell merch to women piece of shit.
Let us get wet.
The next step in the gang's plan is to track down one Monoko. His actor has a deep voice, and this makes everything he says funny. Monaco sold a promising Anthony Martial to Manchester United for 37 million euros, and although the young player had some talent in 1v1 scenarios where he could exploit inexperienced defenders with his relative pace and solid dribbling ability, his lack of physical fortitude and inability to be a decisive attacking player meant that he was simply not meant for the English Premier League, and would draw out a slightly underwhelming career with the Reds before being transferred to the Athletic Union of Constantinople. Many such cases with Manchester United as of the last decade. Unrelated to that, but Monoko is a comic relief character with such a great design both mechanically and in his script that I can't really find anything bad to say about him. You do have to go through the game killing Nevrons if you want to get all of his abilities, but you know, if you like his gameplay, that's hardly a steep price for entry. Sandfall shows off their marketing proof of concept by having all of the women of the group go and fawn over the annoying Gestrel. The men have a talk, and somewhere, Sean Connery is slapping someone's ass in his grave.
It might be our only shot. This is your only shot. Out of the question. I will never join you again.
There will be a lot of fighting, though.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's true.
There will be a lot of fighting.
Exactly.
Count me in then.
It's probably the funniest interaction in the game, and from what I've seen, the vast majority of people playing Clair Obscur were probably so emotionally won over at this point that this dialogue by itself convinced them that they were playing what was Game of the Year, despite just about everything before and after this being written like mid-tier anime writing at best. That's the nature of Expedition 33. Despite proving to be somewhat rare, the few highs are far easier to remember than the overpowering foreground of lows. Monaco agrees to accompany the crew of cadets along their journey, on the stipulation that they have to pay him extra if Martial scored 25 goals in the first season or wins the Ballon d'Or. Apparently he is also the annoying Gestrel merchant's father. Great. After recruiting Monoko, you can explore his train station to find Grandis, a collection of friendly beings that, like Gestrels, are opposed to the Nevrons plaguing the world. One of them will give you a quest that will lead you outwards towards an icy wasteland. The Nevs here are arguably the strongest Nevrons you'll face along the main story before fighting actual Renoir and Lumiere. Certainly, they were given such a difficult jump in numbers that I opted to skip them and track back later to finish the quest given by the Grandis, after continuing on with the main quest. The next step of which is to go to Old Lumiere, a piece of Lumiere that was split during the fracture, casting it away from what would become Lumiere, and where Nevrons and Gestrels would plague its cumbersome woes. Verso says the paintress's heart is in Old Lumiere, and he knows just how to stop it. But first, Princess Mononoke needs to do his best 9/11 reenactment and knock this tower down. The rubble from the accident splits the group up. The Gestrel lovers on one side, the siblings on the other. Monoko gives some backstory on what life was like before the shattering, the fracture.
Monoko, what was life like before the fracture?
The world was smaller and cozier, livelier. There were many more of us Gestrels back then. The fracture tore our villages apart. Only a fraction of a fraction survived.
A fraction of a fraction is just a smaller fraction, which is still just a fraction. You don't need to talk like that, monkey boy. The siblings make their way to the paintress's heart. Along the way, through Old Lumiere, you can find notes left behind by the citizenry of yore. I'm gonna play one whole recording for you. Let's call this an intermission.
Melanie, 5th of February. The Brigadiers are overdue from their mission to the monolith, and we've lost half our remaining fighting strength to these creatures and their relentless assault. All adults have taken up arms, but I'm a bookkeeper. What am I supposed to do? Count them before they slaughter us? We've hidden the children. At least they're warm and dry in the cellars, but rations are running low. Things are calmer now at the hospital, but that's because most die before we can get to them. I guess I'm living out of pure stubbornness at this point. Survival isn't really survival anymore. Everyone's so quiet lately. Afraid it will draw attention. Sometimes I talk to myself just to hear another human voice. Trevor, you promised I could die before you. You promised.
I mean, guys, you can do a second take, Jesus. Someone on the writing team had a sister who is literally the best voice actress of all time, so they gave her a credit and then just threw her lines into an item they were hoping nobody would find. Ahead of the unseasoned notes is an unskippable fight. Beating it leads to the cutscene where Inverso disappears. Mael is confused, and the very English voice actress says, Putain. Did you guys know this game was French? The enemies you fight in this zone have the interesting attribute of being fixed with just over 10k HP. This is Sandfall Interactiving with their damage cap in a way that makes the game what some people might call fun. The idea is to put their HP just above 10k so that when you hit a max, you need to rely on burn damage or love taps to finish them off. I'm not bringing this up to complain about this specifically, but instead to remind you that through all of the story we've been past, there has been a feeling of railroaded parry simulator accompanying it the whole time, in my opinion, not to the experience's benefit. Because you're damage locked per swing, the actual best method of combat in Expedition 33 is to find the wealthiest access to swings. After experimenting with different skills, one will find that free aim shots are objectively the best options against anything that isn't a boss, and even then it's a toss-up. With Maelum's Medallum, acquired earlier in the Gestural Village, a player can begin a fight with 2 times damage. Each free aim shot is worth 1 AP, so with Energizing Start Pictai, which players are bound to get even if they are hardly looking, each free aim shot can be used for double damage, and with a greater number of hits equal to starting AP. Stack on some damage buffs and burn application per free aim, and suddenly starting fights with Mael going first becomes the most effective tool for combat in every scenario prior to gaining Mael's Painter's abilities. This is doubly true because ending fights in a single turn prevents the opponents from attacking you, which means you never take damage, which means you gain 20% more XP per fight, which means you level higher, faster, which in turn means you hit harder, which in turn means you continue to spiral into more and more damage. Playing any other way demands far more time and often results in less XP being obtained, which is unfortunate because the player is essentially being asked to fight without interacting with any other characters, skills, or weapons than the Medallum, Maelum, Freelum build. My first and third playthrough of this game to different forms of success were played using this method, and I didn't need to look up a guide for it because it was simply such an obvious solution for someone who plays games relatively often. Sandfall has restricted the gameplay so much that the best solutions to anyone looking at the system with any depth were going to be corralled into the most obvious playstyle. Admittedly, this is not just a problem with Clair Obscur, but also turn-based RPGs in general. The amount of time it takes to fight weak enemies is always too much because the barriers for completion become tied to the PC's ability to load into the fight, render the animations, and then render the post-fight screen. You begin a fight, and a lovely piano plays as its battle music. I'm constantly being swung from being enthralled with the ambiance of the game and its soundtrack to being embarrassed by its dialogue and stiff animations, and then being swung right to the hell that is being blue-balled by my damage caps, preventing me from progressing any of my characters until the game is just about over. Using the Feature's multi-hit lightning abilities with a crit build is the one way to shake your fist, however meekly, at the damage caps early, but even then, you're only ever going to hit however many damage caps as the abilities have hits times 2. It robs the game of some of its progressional magic in favor of a handheld design that makes all one-tap abilities just about useless for 95% of the game. Alone, Mael continues on without Reverso. She thinks she's close.
Think I'm close.
And she is. A manor, the manor, stands before her. Mael approaches it with a caution and outwalks this person. Myself, I feel that the paintress's design, or rather Aline's design, was inspired by DBD's The Spirit. See how Rin's body flickers and snaps around, and compare this with Aline's hair and general aesthetics. I say Aline, it's really referred to as the curatress, actually. The vague floatiness of their being is juxtaposed with the slight agitated movements to create a very unsettling energy, which meshes very well with the mental instability that the curatress, the paintress, Aline, has. Mael is cautious, but suddenly a Pierso runs out from seemingly nowhere. You can see Minoko's son run in from the distance, which is consistent with the theme of him just being ahead of everyone else in the story because he's simply faster. Or, at least I think that's what Sandfall was going for. He was with Mael and Verso the whole time, so it's actually kind of a head-scratcher as to where he's been.
I knew you'd open the door for her.
Saga, sneak attacks don't work if you yell it out loud.
Really, Verso? This was your plan?
Including this line qualifies what Verso has done here, but like quite a few things in this game, the execution just stole any luster his sneaky plan might have had.
How many times must you hurt our family?
No, you don't get to lecture me on family.
Why do you refuse to see I am doing this for us? Yet you insist on rushing toward death. You're trying to stop the wrong cycle.
You're doing this for yourself.
The writers are including these lines to set us up for the big one. Painted Renoir insists that the cycle of grief as experienced by Aline should be allowed to continue, while the cycle pushed by actual Renoir, the cycle that aims to return Aline and later Alicia to their actual lives, is worth stopping. Here we have the basis for Team Red and Team Blue in the Clair Obscur philosophy classroom. Team Red, on Verso's side, is composed of men. Team Blue, on Miles' side, is composed entirely of women. Why do I say that, you ask? We absolutely will talk about it later. Just know that apparently the writing staff that worked on this game were somehow split on their opinions of the morality of what comes at the end, and there is literally no other explanation for how anyone could ever be confused about which ending is the good one unless they were a woman Twitter painted over Gustav and his ambitions, or the ladies of Clair Obscur and their delusions. This is a conclusion I've come to through very rigorous and scientific testing methods, I assure you. The dialogue here makes sure to have Verso say the dumbest shit possible instead of pleading with Paintoir to do anything that makes sense. Painted Renoir only cares about protecting his family. Painted Alicia, Painted Claire, Paintress Aline, and in some ways still Verso. Verso, inversely, has two main motivations, the first being to destroy the canvas. His mother's addiction to it is killing her, his sister is about to follow the same path as his mother, and his soul is quite tired of being used to keep the structure of the canvas alive, if you will. Second, he is tired. He's lived in a state of immortality for over a century, and he wants the nightmare to be over. He doesn't seem like the type to envy those who know not that they are not, but he definitely doesn't like to know that he isn't, and so Verso sees death as a welcome customer. We find, later, that Verso is more than willing to abandon that first motivation so long as it allows him to finally die. So death, really, is the focus of all that encompasses his prerogative as what you might call a cursed demigod within the canvas. I'd expect that coming to an agreement about his want for gamage with Painted Ren would be impossible, since the only person on Painted Renoir's side that's capable of such a thing is Aline, and she is never going to gamage what she thinks is her son. Still, something in me wishes the dialogue either here or at any point before or later was a little more tethered and realistic. But instead, Sandfall opts to keep everything as vague as possible, because that makes a second playthrough cooler, and so we get this meaningless spattering.
Verso, move. I'm gonna fucking kill him.
Mile, Verso isn't even standing in your way. They just made her say that so she could have this dramatic moment, and it's so obnoxious. Even Painted Ren makes this face like, come on dude, relax. The rest of the gang shows up, and yeah. They gave me the option to have Luna in a swimsuit, so that's what she's going to be wearing in at least some of this footage. I'm not sorry at all. Luna, CL, and Hornonoko did a bit of reading and found out that Painted Renoir and Verso are father and son. In her anger and hatred of lies, she approaches Verso and berates him. This shit is so high school drama club, in the same breath that she mentions the fact that Renoir one-tapped the majority of Expedition 33, she turns her back on him to wag her finger at Verso. Like Luna doesn't actually even know if Verso is on their side at this point, and why is she so comfortable acting so casually in front of fucking Renoir, of all people? This guy insta-killed Gustav like 2 damage caps ago. This is the behavior of someone who wants to kill herself, like Ciel, not an analytical math competition whiz like Lune. Renoir is as equally annoyed at everyone's behavior as I am, so he smashes his old man Kane into the ground and a fight ensues. It's fine. It's just a boss fight in Clair Obscur 33. You parry, you use just whatever abilities, honestly, and then repeat. You can survive this move in the fight itself, but if you beat Painted Renoir, a cutscene triggers this move again, and instead of parrying, everyone kind of just accepts that they're going to get one-tapped. Is this a form of Ludo narrative dissonance? It sucks, that's for sure. Everyone survives the blast except for Monoko's son. What's his annoying name again? It's strange because he's so much faster than everyone else but couldn't manage to just get out of the way. It's not like he was contributing to the fight, right? The death is played off as a tragedy, and I'm sure everyone on Team Blue was bawling their eyes out, but given my disposition towards gestrels, I'm sure you'll forgive me for not being possessed by the necessary demon to care.
Why can't you accept who you are?
Renoir knows that Maëlle doesn't know that she's Alicia, which means there's no reason for him to say this. The writers make him say it because it makes the narrative more meaningful after the fact, but it doesn't actually work. The idea is to draw some light onto the concept of acceptance and moving on with the reality of one's situation, to draw focus on the actual hypocrisy that Painted Renoir observes. See, to him, the Painted family is his family, but he's just a recreation of Renoir. So he should know that his actual family, the family that is real, is not the Painted family, but whom they represent. He has been driven over many years to solidify his belief in his conviction in what he is doing, and consequently is not only helping to kill Aline over time, but is also, in this moment, well and truly striking his own daughter. All of that I get. It's good writing, it's good storytelling, but the line should have been altered slightly because Painted Ren knows that Maëlle doesn't know the truth yet. Maëlle is not currently having trouble accepting who she is because who she is, as far as she could possibly know, is Maëlle, and Painted Ren knows that. The only way this isn't a dumb line is if we're supposed to believe that Maëlle, deep down, knows that she's Alicia and is playing along for the fantasy of being someone else entirely. Given her actual, real reactions to seeing Painted Alicia, we can say for sure that this isn't the case. Painted Alicia emerges from the manor, and the main menu theme from earlier plays, but it's not the main menu theme. It is in fact an alternate version. I don't know how long the OST will remain on YouTube, but presuming forever, you can find the two versions of the theme named Alicia. The first version is what we found in the main menu, go figure. The beautiful piece that has nearly brought me to tears at least once a week. I cannot stop listening to it. But the version that plays here is slightly altered, both in vocal effects but also in musical composition. The main menu theme, as played in the main menu, features archaic French lyrics sung over a classical music composition, which is actually not true. It is a inverted language, according to Google, a language that combines Latin, French, and a host of other languages to come up with something that is altogether fictional. I actually wrote this script believing that the lyrics were of an archaic French origin, because that's just what people seemed to be saying at the time. It wasn't until I was talking about Clair Obscur with a Diablo 2 player named Schmoulbla, who is a Frenchman himself, don't tell him about the jokes that I've made so far, he pointed out that the information was incorrect. He had finished playing through the game at the time and had this to say about the main menu theme.
There's a lot of people that think that because the game is French, and they don't understand French, they think that the main menu lyrics for Alicia, the Alicia song, is French. Some people also think like, oh, that's old French, or that's French from some, region of France, like Occitan, or like. No, it's not. It's not. It's pure fictional language that include some French word or words that sound French, but it's not. It's not. And I've heard that they made that so everybody can have that French feeling and can recognize themselves without having to understand the language. And for them, without to also have to make like real French lyrics that would eventually spoil the story.
Alice Dupont-Persier's performance is not mithered with effects placed on after the fact. It is very much close to a raw recording in this original piece. The second version, which we hear not only during this scene, but other scenes where Painted Alicia and Maëlle interact, is but the same song with what I think is maybe a synthesizer accompanying it. The most important change is that Dupont-Persier's vocal performance has an echo applied, so that it sounds as though there are two of them singing over each other, to resemble the two girls who are supposed to be but the same person interacting with one another. Not groundbreaking, but the representative function of this second version of Alicia, the song, being used very well to create an all-encompassing storytelling method, and that is true for the lyrics as well. Even if you're only half paying attention, you've probably noticed that certain words of the song sound a lot like references to specific characters. Maëlle, Alicia, Verso, and Lune. Painted Alicia reaches out and touches Maëlle's arm, and Verso is just screaming in the background.
What is that?
Real Verso burned alive after the writers set fire to the manor. That is, the writers in the game, not the writers of the game. It is implied by Real Renoir, her father, that this happened because of something Maëlle did directly. According to him and Aline, it is her fault. Verso died saving Alicia from the flames, though she didn't escape unharmed, as you can see. Painted Alicia, painted from Aline's memories, was created with her burns and inability to speak, just as Aline might think of her. And more importantly, just as Aline thinks of her as guilty in a rash attempt to prioritize blame on somebody else. We'll explore that concept later. The loss of Verso creates the foundation for the Descendre family's grief. Aline's heartbreak, Maëlle's guilt, Claire, mon ami, and what seems to be her relatively stable coping with the hardship, and Renoir, who is the only man in the family left, and thus the only one left on Team Red, or, in other words, the only one who is able to see the forest for the trees as it pertains to what needs to happen to the canvas. In reality, this actually isn't true. Claire is just on board with Renoir, if not more so, when it comes to the destruction of the canvas. Maëlle takes in what she's heard and seen, and the manor disappears. Verso says Alicia's name, suggesting that she, painted Alicia, might be the one personally responsible for moving the manor, and has a hissy fit. That concludes the gang's shuffle into Old Lumiere, and they are returned to the best part of the game, the camp.
Glory. Thank you, mon ami.
I despise this guy so much. Lune starts pressing Verso on his omissions about his family, and the fact that he's related to the guy who slaughtered Expedition 33. Verso says that it's painful, personal, and none of her business, and that he told them everything they needed to know. And his lines must have been written by Team Blue on this one. Lune makes a great point as she says that whether or not he gave them all relevant information is something she'd like to see for herself. And instead of making the scheming Verso answer that question, Ciel butts in and says,
We can all understand where each other's coming from, right?
Look, after everything is said and done, Verso is absolutely the hero of the story, and I'm on his side, but as far as the expeditioners know, he is 110% untrustworthy. And Ciel is single-handedly waving off the fact that he just found himself intentionally destroying a tower in Old Lumiere to get alone with Maëlle, so that he could use her as bait. There is no reason, given what they know, that they should be trusting Verso enough to wave off his explanations. He's up to something, and just like every other part of the game leading up to this point, they just don't ask relevant questions. Not a single one. Everything is always just vague enough to make sure the player is arbitrarily held out of true understanding of what's going on. Cool story, but your writing methods are lazy and tired, Sandfall. Monkey Man is holding his dead son in a jar, and it's supposed to be sad, but oh my god, I just can't care for it. Verso tries to comfort him by saying this.
I'm so very sorry, my friend. And all for naught.
Mate, don't talk to a grieving father like that, Jesus. Since the heart of the paintress, the manor, is gone, Verso is convinced that all hope of getting through the barrier is also gone. Lune says that Expedition 58 remarked on the fact that Verso thought there was another way to pierce through the paintress's protective barrier, to which he replies that the way is actually a dead end, the way is shut. Lune does some asking around with the curator, who communicates the need for the axons to be taken down. Lune recalls seeing the massive axon, dead in Old Lumiere, and suddenly Verso goes from saying it's a dead end to it's very unlikely that they could defeat the Axons, who need to be put down to obtain the chroma necessary for the barrier piercing weapon. Why did I say it like that? Who need to be put down to obtain the chroma necessary for the barrier piercing weapon to be obtained. The first problem I have with all of this is the way the conversation comes to a close.
Taking them down without you lot dying are close to zero.
Close, but not zero. Death is coming either way. And as expeditioners, if we die fighting.
Wonderful pep talk.
I know.
Wildly cringe, eh? Second, we have yet another example of a character doing shit that they would just never do. Verso cares about ending his life first and foremost, and destroying the canvas second to one. With those two principles in mind, he would not have hid the alternate method of getting through the barrier from the crew. Am I supposed to believe that if Lune hadn't have asked about the other method, that he would have just thrown his hands up and accepted his fate as a foregone conclusion? Absolutely not. He would have seen the available option in front of himself and pursued it 100%. So why even pretend like Lune has to drag this information out of him? Well, you and I both know why. Anime-tiered drama creation for no reason. They are introducing this character behavior to create meaningless suspense. Verso should have just brought up the Axon method as a starter. Ciel and Maëlle could have been distrusting of Verso. And you have your form of suspense. Then, Lune, despite being the most suspicious of Verso, would have been forced to back up his plan since she knows axons can be felled, and she's read information in Expedition 58's log that backs up what Verso is saying. There you go. There is your camp scene, but nay. Verso acts dumb, Lune rightly acts annoyed, then annoying, and now I'm annoyed. Poor writing. When the game suggests that the writers were responsible for the fire, does it care to mention if they were burned alive so as to excuse their apparent ineptitude here? Ultimately, the gang agrees to go fight the Axons, and whichever one to start with is completely up to the player. In between here, the Axons and now the camp, you can find the Gestural Beach, which houses the volleyball minigame, and I find this to be a perfect time to talk about the side content you can do up to this point. We've already covered the other Gestural Beaches, and while getting swimsuits to put on the Team Blue self-inserts is excellent, it's also true that the game would be better off without the climbing minigames. Frankly, the volleyball minigame is even worse than them. The aim of the game is to smack these explosive Gestrals back to the server until his platform is destroyed, getting through each phase, which rise in difficulty. The cheat code that the devs gave us are these little black sections of the platform. Aim for these, and all that's left is getting the timing down. But as simple as it might come across in the footage, I promise you that coming to this beach felt like torture for completionists and writers who needed footage of everything we could get our hands on. I suppose that the best excuse for this content is that it's supposed to be silly side content that doesn't take itself too seriously, and you're supposed to skip it and not complain that it's brutally unfun. It sounds a lot like content in other games I've covered. More pertinent side content would be the bosses found in locations throughout the map. Just outside of the starting location of Spring Meadows is the Abyss Cave, home of the Chromatic Abyss. The Chromatic Abyss is built in a way that begets some questions surrounding Sandfall's philosophy of side bosses and whether or not you're supposed to fight them upon discovery or save them for later. In an RPG like Morrowind, a character at level 5 might be very weak compared to a character of a different build at the same level, and so some encounters are doable while others require extra training depending on many different factors. But in Expedition 33, every playthrough is going to be railroaded in terms of power level. And so every party, 5 hours into a session, is going to be very, very close to just about every other party at the same point in time, regardless of build. At the point in time that one can find the Chromatic Abyss, certainly will everyone be at roughly equal power levels. That means that Sandfall knew how tedious this encounter was going to be and left it as is anyway. In doing so, they've destroyed some semblance of consistency in their boss design, and more specifically the boss placement. The chromatic variants of enemies are just normal enemies buffed up to represent bosses. The Chromatic Lancier found in Spring Meadows is considered side content as the boss is optional, but as you can see, just under 400 damage does roughly 10% of his HP. We can roughly estimate the Chromatic Lancier's max HP to be between 4 and 5k. The Chromatic Abyss, found just outside of this zone, has a max HP of 86,000. Quite a jump, and definitely points to the idea that optional bosses are not always to be fought at a first encounter. Whether or not this is the case just needs to be felt out by the player. Golgra shouldn't be attempted before gaining access to the Paintress's Pictos, for example. BK Dorito beat her earlier than that, and it took him nearly an hour on the run that succeeded. Just imagine how much time passed for him to get to that level of perfection in the first place. Sprong is another good example of this. His HP is so tall that it's better to come back during Act 3 to take him down after Mael gains access to her transcendent abilities. The same cannot be said for the Chromatic Hexka, which can be taken down with a naturally leveled party, nor Gross Tete, which is a meme boss designed to commit Ciel after being parried an obnoxious number of times. I am a huge advocate of making bosses that are reasonably taken down on a first meet. Maybe not a first try, but a first meet and in a reasonable amount of time, please. Definitely don't make bosses that are locked behind a time gate as their only prerequisite to kill. Once you figure out the Chromatic Abyss's movesets, for example, you're really just sitting there for 10 to 20 minutes whittling them down, hoping that your controller doesn't die while you patiently parry, parry, parry. Awful design. Gaining access to Esquier should have been the go-ahead to run back around and kill all the bosses you missed on the first half of the continent. Gaining access to swimming should have been the go-ahead to clean up the water bosses and the bosses on the outskirts of the map off the shores, and gaining access to flight should have marked the time in which players could access all bosses blocked by verticality. Instead, many bosses, though not all, are best left off for the late game, or, at least, later in the game. Players who know what to expect and value their time will opt to skip 15 collective hours of frustration fighting bosses upon finding them when they can take only a few minutes after backtracking post-Paintress boss fight. The downside is that you lose out on some Pictos, XP, and upgrade materials, but that is a small price to pay for anyone who doesn't value being arbitrarily patient enough to sit there and hit the parry button for an hour at a time, with repetitive anime dialogue in between like the rest of us. And thanks to the damage caps, well, those Pictos aren't really going to matter much for the early to mid game anyway. If you know what you're doing, you can kill the bosses early, but if you know what you're doing, you don't need their rewards to progress. I think the HP stacking isn't worth the coolness factor of finding a boss that's absurdly time-locked, if that's a factor for anyone to begin with. Elden Ring, a game I consider guilty of stacking boss HP beyond what's reasonable, is actually better of the two games when it comes to this problem. Because in Elden Ring, you at least have the freedom to move around and express yourself through the gameplay in ways that Clair Obscur just doesn't allow for, and has altogether quicker boss kill times even when under-leveled. Remember what I've said about parry simulators taking away freedom of movement. In any case, Expedition 33 does a very poor job at taking first-time encounters into consideration, instead opting to tune up HP bars for the sake of very cool and immersive, never mind, I'll just skip this moments. In open-world games where the world is actually open and not just a Mario-level selection UI in disguise, having bosses in niche areas be extra strong than everything around it works much, much better than it does in Expedition 33, and I do not find this fault minor. For me, it is one of the most annoying parts about exploration in this game, because you constantly find yourself turned off to the idea of learning any new bosses, because 4 out of 5 times they are just not worth sitting through for 3/4 of an hour on a single attempt. Throughout the part of the game we've covered, the player will have found a number of optional bosses, including the Chromatic Lancier, Abest, Troubadour, Hexka, Semivex, and Burgeons, and each will vary in how well they were designed for first-time encounters. Fights found in non-optional areas are generally tuned much, much more in favor of the player and are far more forgiving as you near the later stages of the game, and as we can see with the quest given in Minoko Station, you will find yourself increasingly taxed by the numbers the game puts in front of you. Because Sandfall has the be-all solution to every move in the game in the form of parrying and dodging, they didn't opt to pursue normal party RPG methods of balancing for bosses that are far more difficult than the content that surrounds them. Normally, bosses like this are built to be defeated through careful planning and an abundance of resources stocked beforehand. Bosses in Clair Obscur, such as the aforementioned Chromatic Abest, are beaten through 10 minutes to an hour of perfect parrying. It is an absolute snooze fest. We return to the gang, who has decided to move to the 2 Axons. I played having beat both first on a separate playthrough, and even though the game outright states that the Axon to the east is supposed to be the harder of the two, I could not tell you why the devs think that aside from HP levels. The Western Axon allows you to take out significant portions of its power prior to the fight by exploring segments of the island and eliminating various masks that would otherwise aid it. By the time you get to the Axon itself, its power level will have been significantly reduced, and your character's fairly buffed up in terms of new items and levels. With all that said, I still feel the Western Axon sports moves that are generally more difficult to read for the purposes of parrying than the Eastern Axon, which, being the tissue that it is, essentially falls apart when in the vicinity of fire. I'd actually agree that the Axons themselves are very close in terms of power level to one another, but the fights preceding them are where the differences lie. The masks are all straightforward fights with Neverons, who took their pre-workout, while the Eastern Axon has an optional fight that's worth the trouble, and is a lot of trouble, and a non-optional fight in the form of the Glissando worm. This is a good time to talk about the jump-dodge mechanic. In theory, this was absolutely created to give variance to fights, but in practice, it just acts as a gimme. Unless it's your first time fighting a boss, you'll land the jump window every time because it's absurdly forgiving, which means all of the moves that require jump responses, like the ballet summons Glissando performs, all look like easy opportunities to return damage. It's basically a one-time free use for the AI to maybe get a hit in before becoming a freebie for the player. After defeating Laetitia and Glissando, the player can move to fight Sirène, she who plays with wonder. The gang has already experienced her work, which puts them into a trance. Along the way to her position, you can find an Expeditioner log detailing Expedition 67's work destroying the Colosseum for traversal. Luke of Expedition 67 eventually loses his wits and abandons his mission in favor of listening to Sirène's melody, Serena, whatever, which has him and his mates entranced. Strangely, Luke mentions that his and his expedition's role here has been to use explosives to carve out a path to Sirène, but it appears that Sirène has these little transport floaties all around the Colosseum, so I'm not sure why the holes are necessary when this place is already made for traversal, but maybe the idea is that Sirène has this place constructed so that anyone can traverse the Colosseum, but no one could get near her. Rather, maybe Renoir, who created the axons in the first place, made it just so, a fitting metaphor for the state that Aline, who the axon represents, is in, and is representative of the violent path everyone needs to take just to save her. The group reaches Sirene and the fight begins. Everyone is taken in by her power except for Verso, who appears to retain his resolve. In my latest playthrough, which went through pains to try and go through the vast majority of CO's content, I was so over-leveled by the time I got to this fight that I really was just slamming past Sirene and her goons. I absolutely love video games that let you become OP. Modern games often tend to try and level everything with the player to make an almost non-existent difficulty curve that remains at a flat constant. But Clair Obscur lets you become far and away the most powerful thing in the game, and that is fun as hell. I enjoy destroying bosses on second playthroughs where I originally had quite a lot of trouble on the first. Yes, it's mostly just a numbers game, but it is satisfying nonetheless. If you don't blaze through Sirene, you will have to contend with movesets that are mostly innocuous until her second phase, parry the charms, downvote the dances with glissando, and you're home free. The second phase begins a final act. If you can remember to parry the worm after jumping the gimmies, the fight is a cakewalk. In a surprise turn of events, it is Lune who executes Sirene, not Verso, who's charmed by her desperate attempts to save the fight. Presumably, Lune fits the bill because she's analytical and isn't likely to get won over by falsehoods, even though she totally did like 5 minutes ago multiple times. Killing Sirene, she uses a move that I don't think is something you can actually do in the game. She charges a great deal of chroma and then smacks Sirene in the face, Game of Thrones, giant style, and I guess I'm just not supposed to think about it too hard, right? Lune, just like CL, is a vessel for self-insert fantasization, which means she needs to have her big moment at some point. The Western Axon is far more interesting from a narrative perspective.
Oh, I'm harmless. You don't need those.
Well, if you're harmless, then these weapons will stay harmless too.
Touché.
That's not how touche is used. Leading up to the fight with the Axon, you can opt to take down its masks one by one, or go straight to the Axon itself without fighting the masks, leading to a stronger fight overall. Moving down each of the side paths, each mask, or visage, provides a unique fight with, as we've been over, some jacked up Nevrons. Each of the three visages represent a common emotion. Known as he who protects truth with lies, the Axon is a bit of a misdirect, and in more ways than one. Renoir painted the visage to represent Verso, a man who we see only a fragment of in the painted Verso that accompanies us on the expedition. The true Verso, who isn't tethered to Aline's limited memory, can ultimately be assumed to be a different man than the one in the canvas. The visage is Renoir's representation of that man, in the exact same way Sirene is Renoir's artistic rendering of Aline, and the dead holler in Old Lumiere, Clea. To guard truth with lies. The phrase implies that, unlike the normal concept of lying, or false pretenses, what is real isn't an object of disinterest. In fact, Verso's Axon seems to represent the truth of a situation, but in a roundabout way. Here are some of the lines of poetry displayed when initiating fights with the masks. He who cannot fight fate, behind his scowl emotions blaze, but in the shadows his temper fades. He who lives in between, behind his veil emotions swell, for a life forced to paint. He who painted this world, seeking what he could not grasp, longing to share with those he loves. The visage's home has access to a manor door which leads to Renoir's journal entry.
Art can be a window, and art can be a mirror. And great art is both. Son, you'll never be a true artist if there's always a mask between you and the viewer, especially when the viewer is you.
Let's not take this at face value and instead try to understand what Renoir's philosophy is, both with art and how that philosophy relates to Verso. Verso is a musician at heart, and his apparent love for what is a medium his family is not known for and, evidently, doesn't value as highly as he would like, makes the man live a life with moderate talent for painting, but next to no love for the practice as a profession. The poetry referenced earlier states, "He who lives in between, behind his veil emotions swell, for a life forced to paint," thus confirming the notion. He paints out of duty, not interest. As many of you probably came to find, what happens in the canvas is almost never an isolated incident. Just as the souls of the painters involved with the canvas's creations loosely remain throughout, it appears that the happenings in the canvas mirror what the souls are experiencing. As an example, take CL. She lost her child and her husband well before his time. Might these experiences not mirror Aline's life? Aline begins to feel separated emotionally from her husband, and as a result, one of her creations loses her husband. Aline's son dies, and Ciel happens to lose her own child. I don't think these are unintentional coincidences made simply for the sake of making Ciel a relatable character for women who have had an abortion. I think the writers were very, very careful in designing the personalities of the paintresses and painters' creations to mirror what imprints the souls of creation might have had on their lives. I know it's probably jarring to hear me bring this up, but Karl Marx, did you know that his philosophy wasn't strictly concerned with economics? I mean, it was, pretty much, but he talked a lot about art and artists, and something that has always stuck with me is that he believed that art can say more about the artist and the social and economic state of their being than what the art itself revolves around. We can apply this very principle to Marx himself, or the ideologies that have since been developed which were founded on his political theories. We can tease out accurate information regarding the man just by reading his work, or the work itself might make theorizations about society which may or may not have any bearing on reality. Expedition 33 tells a story. It shows us a window, but because it's art, it also represents a mirror. The window reveals a story, and reveals what the artists behind the story want to convey. But more than that, it reveals information about the artists outside of this very work, about how they live, about how they think about the world around them, the philosophies they choose to uphold. The mirror, for us, the spectator and the player, reveals aspects of our mind by analyzing how we digest the story in front of us. The easiest example of this is the ending. What does it mean about a person for them to find Mael's ending to be the most moral of the two? Let's go deeper. What does it mean about you to think that of a person who finds Mael's ending to be the most moral of the two? What does it mean about you to think that that is what your opinion of them means? We can go as infinitely deep as you would like with this practice. You can become increasingly aware not only of what you think about a thing, but what your thoughts on a thing make of you. It can make you increasingly critical of yourself and increasingly partial to other people's perspectives. For the intellectually honest, this practice can act as a gateway to a greater sense of empathy for others. For the unwise, it can also act as a destructor of conviction. I see in Renoir and Verso and the Visage men who are just as concerned with why art is made as they are with whether or not the art is made in the first place. I see in Alicia and Aline two women who don't care about why their art exists so long as they can partake in its succor. I see in Clea a woman whose convictions all lie toward protecting the family by winning the war. Saving Aline, and thus helping Renoir, are altogether distractions to her. A conviction that has led some players to understandably mistake Clea for someone harboring psychopathic tendencies. And what does all of this say about the game? And what does it say about me that I might think that? The fight with the Visages, in my opinion, is more difficult in the sense that his moves can seem to be harder to judge, but easier in the sense that he's just not really as tanky, as far as I can tell. On my latest playthrough, marked by my expedition's white uniforms, I was most experienced and leveled, and he only got one turn in before getting cracked. On my first playthrough, things did not go so smoothly, and here the differences between his moveset and Sirene's showed. Even though she seemed tankier, she also had a lot of jump attacks in her moveset, which meant there was a lot of free damage associated with her fight. The moves she did have that didn't allow for free damage return were fairly easy to parry on a first playthrough, unlike the Visage's moves. After getting cracked, the Mask Keeper reveals himself to be the true Axon, hiding his identity and keeping with the theme of masking the truth. Beating him feels a lot like beating wannabe Pontiff Sullivan in the sense that you really need to be able to intuit rapid sword swings, or at least be able to get the timing of the audio cues down. His strikes are numerous and they come rapidly. If you're overleveled like my white crew, his attacks aren't going to do much to you, and you can smack him down pretty quick. A lot like Visage. Where Lune's callous mathematical personality aided her against Sirene, Ciel's honest self-image aided her against the Mask Keeper, since she had little to nothing she cared to hide from anyone. There was nothing a mask could have shown her that she didn't already know. With one Axon dead, the crew can produce half of the mask chroma that the Curator needs to make the barrier breaker, capable of destroying the Paintress's barrier. They are almost ready to take her down. But wait, before that cool stuff, remember that we're at camp, which means we get to dialogue chatbot with everyone. Huzzah! Between fighting the two Axons, Mael sees Renoir's image in the Curator. She does the whole, I can't believe I'm seeing things bit that she's been doing for the last 20 hours. Like, dude, get over it. Verso gives Minoko a haircut. CL has sex with Verso, good for him, but the experience unlocks an ability for CL called Doom, which doesn't exactly point to a good performance on Verso's part, I must say. After banging the tarot card reader, Verso relaxes by playing a song for his sister, whomstead doesn't know she's his sister. If you're dumb like me, you didn't know for a fact that she was his sister in your first playthrough either. To show you that the moment isn't romantic, Sandfall stuck this annoying plushy merchandise behind the two characters to dance around. The two laugh together, and I know this is supposed to be a nice moment, but I just don't believe in the emotion these two are conveying, and it's really not the fault of the actors.
What song was that?
Why the directors needed them to outwardly express something like exaggerated joy, instead of just allowing them to express a solemn but genuine warmth together, comes down, I think, to taste and talent. First, the writers or directors or whoever thought they should laugh like this just didn't really care how it came off in the final product. That's amateur. Second, the animators do not have the talent to subtly convey not so subtle emotions. Go play The Last of Us. The one from over a decade ago. How the characters in that game physically react to things matters just as much as what they do or say. Sometimes more so. If your characters look too stiff to accurately convey to the audience minute changes in thought or emotion, just make them audibly announce to everyone what's happening in their heads. This principle is everywhere in this game, and it is undoubtedly why I think Clair Obscur Expedition 33 resembles the writing style of anime. Now, I'm not talking about anything old school, where characters were drawn to have weightiness and detail to their movements. I'm talking about the vast majority of widely consumed modern anime, where every character is not defined by their human-like characteristics, because they all look the same, but rather color coding and trope assignment. The contemporary era of modern anime, largely, but not always, conveys what should be subtle information with loud, obnoxious, over-the-top exaggeration because there is little wiggle room for anything else, no pun intended. And no, this is not the point of anime. It's a stylistic choice that coincides well with being able to produce mass amounts of content at a rapid pace, enabled by the fact that people who enjoy anime, often but not always, tend to be underdeveloped, mentally ill children or teenagers with no artistic standards for the art they consume, and also grown adults who are both. We live in an era where people see Miyazaki's life work culminated into a nice little toy in My Hero Academia as the holy grail of entertainment.
Don't be afraid of getting answers wrong or not knowing anything.
Now, I don't mean to give Sandfall an out here. I'm not saying that they are doing the best with what they have. I'm saying they either lack the intellect or the will to accomplish what they want in a mature way, partially because of their animators' limitations. Partially. The Last Airbender did not have great animation. It was just barely serviceable, and yet it is one of the greatest shows ever created. You don't need the greatest animation of all time. You need the talent and the will to deliver a message with the tools available. Sandfall chose the most readily available tool in the form of a modern, exaggerated storytelling style, and as a result, they sacrificed any semblance of nuance. That's child's play. After beating both axons, the cycle repeats. Mile presents the curator with the second source of chroma, and she gets a vision, this time of Aline, and does the whole, oh my god, I can't believe I'm seeing a vision thing. Make a character react this way enough, and suddenly their woes mean nothing. Boy who cried wolf and all that. The curator makes the barrier breaker, and now we can fight the paintress. Seeing this message pop up on my screen, announcing that fact, felt perfect. Expedition 33's pacing in terms of gameplay progression is just about perfect. You wake up and in no time you acquire Lune. You acquire Lune and then you find Mael. You find Mael and you're quickly upon CL. You find CL and you're quickly upon Esquier. Now you move quickly across the map and suddenly you're upon the Stonewall Cliffs. You lose Gustav, you acquire Verso. Now you can swim. And the map opens up. But even though the map opens up, you can still quickly acquire Monoko. Get the Foot Enthusiast, and suddenly you're in Old Lumiere. You can view the Hauler and fight Renoir, and suddenly you've devised a plan to fight two massive axons that you know little about. Kill the axons, and bam! You get this message telling you that you can fight the Paintress. There are just no lulls in the main portion of the game. Because of a thing, another thing happens, which makes another thing happen. It's about 1 to 3 hours in between each, and the progression is just so smooth and non-frictional. There was never a point in pursuing the main story where I felt like things weren't moving fast enough because the game just doesn't make you wait around for progression. You have your story, it's north. and it's up to you how quickly you want to get there. It is here that Sandfall has overachieved, but it's not all compliments because of course we're back at the camp, which means more character development dumping. Verso and Monoko have a duel. Maëlle is sorrowful over Gustav's death, and just in general she's quite upset. Verso makes her feel better by saying dead people live on in memory and influence or whatever. Lune has a therapy session with Verso by telling him that her parents used her as an unpaid research partner. And did you need to make the studious analytical character with overbearing parents Asian? I feel that's a little on the nose. Relationship level 5. Ciel has a therapy session with Verso by telling him that her husband died in an accident, washing his body away off the coast. It's actually a compelling loss in a world where everyone seems to be losing everything all the time, because Ciel's loss of her husband was preventable, otherworldly influences notwithstanding. The Gamage didn't take him. They still had 6 more years together. So it's really a true loss by their standards.
He died in an accident on one of the islands near Lumiere. His body washed away.
I'm sorry.
I was prepared for his gommage, but not for him to die in an accident. We were supposed to have 5 more years together.
You were lucky to have found each other. Not everyone has that.
Verso, shut the fuck up. What a shitty line to say to someone who is clearly still grieving for their dead lover. I am team correct when it comes to knowing what ending is the best, but I understand why people don't like Verso. This guy sucks. The thing is, it's not an intentional character trait for him to do stuff like this. This line is only in here because the writers waver between clever and borderline retarded, seemingly at a whim.
Well, I can't compete with that.
You're competing in a different event.
That's a nice way to say fling. Is there a future where I might compete in the same event?
What? In what world does this line make any sense? Verso, what are you talking about? This is what I mean when I say the writers just drop the ball sometimes. It makes 0 sense for Verso to be asking this question. He's trying to help Renoir destroy the canvas. He's trying to kill himself. Why would he have any interest in trying to become Ciel's husband? Hell, she's gonna be gamaged within a year no matter what, and he knows that. Why, oh why in the world would he ask that question? Seriously, why? How could the writers possibly justify that? Pick me, teach, I got the answer. What if it doesn't matter that it makes no sense? Because as we've established, Ciel is just a self-insert just like Lune. And so all that matters is that nice hair, forward gaze, romance character is interested in marrying her. That's why this line is in here. He has 0 reasons to have any interest in marrying Ciel. But the Team Blue writers just really need him to say this because why am I even talking about this? We all understand. I don't care how much you disagree with me, you know in your heart of hearts that this wasn't written in to give Verso some weird, obscure short-sightedness character flaw. It was thrown in purely for the Barnes and Noble fantasy romance fix. What dog shit. I understand why you guys don't like Verso, but it's really not Verso you dislike. It's the Blue Team writers marring his character to appease all of the people who are pressuring the industry to give Expedition 33 Game of the Year votes. I know we all hate video game journalists, but being that I used to be one, I'd like to extend a little credit. Nicholas Becker wrote an article on Screen Rant that's actually pretty good. Talks about this topic, and I think he hit the nail on the head. I'll leave a link to the article in the description just to give credit where credit is due. Yes, Screen Rant is trash. No, the writers themselves are actually not all that bad sometimes. Ciel denies Verso's request to compete for marriage, and the two of them fuck each other, and good for them.
We've done it.
We're really going to face the Paintress.
I guess in the end, we really are Clair Obscur Expedition 33.
That being said, someone here has been hiding a terrible secret from us.
What are you talking about?
You thought we'd never find out, didn't you? Nobody ever wondered what Esquier was made of, did they? Well, Esquier and I had a chat.
I'm sorry, Verso.
Esquire is made up of wine, and I'll admit I laughed my ass off.
Moment. I told you to stop drinking alone.
To your great generosity.
I don't know how you can like this. Do you have apple juice?
Maëlle isn't fucking 9, she's 16. She would have been getting wasted in Lumiere every other weekend at least by now. Come on, Sandfall, you're French for Christ's sake.
Yeah, I'll leave you to it.
Is that not just the weirdest fucking ending to that scene? Is he upset? Is Verso upset or just embarrassed? Is anyone else enjoying themselves? This reminds me of that meme about that party that's totally wild. Everyone is just standing around. Verso walks off and his sister meets him upon the cliff. We hear the alternate version of our beloved main menu theme. She hands Verso an invitation to Volcano Manor, and we aren't going to be seeing that anytime soon, so let's forget about it.
You embrace her, yet you're condemning her to die.
You brought him here.
I'm not here to fight. But my son, do you know what it means to disappear into nothingness? Have you thought through the consequences? Not just for you, or even me, but for them. Their memories, their dreams, their love for each other. Who really is the one painting death, and who paints life instead? We exist and we will exist for as long as she wants. You want to spoil what we've been given. Sometimes we paint the bars of our own prison. Your despair blinds you. You think you're ready to pay the price. But are you willing to let them pay the price for you?
May everything be decided before their very eyes. Between the bars of their prison. In the shadow of the monolith.
So, look, I like some dramatic writing. I like poetic writing. But this feels a little like the devs shoehorning in dialogue through their own mouths instead of through the lens of the characters. May everything be decided through their very eyes? Why? Why would either care to say something like this? I mean, that's the thing. This dialogue is very clearly meant to be artsy and grand. The line that comes after is, between the bars of their prison, in the shadow of the monolith. Very grand, very cool. And because it's supposed to be artsy, it's also sort of untethered to actual dialogue. It's more representative of Verso and Renoir's understanding of the situation. He isn't here to fight Verso, and they both know that whatever happens is going to happen at the monolith with the group of expeditioners. So if I try to analyze this dialogue seriously, I'm a loser who doesn't understand art. And if I just let it go because it's clearly not supposed to follow traditional rules of writing, I'm letting Sandfall get away with their devs playing live poetry readings without a Q&A. Verso and Renoir are absolutely not talking here. The writers just wanted to make a dramatic entrance to make sure we didn't forget that, yes, this game isn't just anime dialogue, bad facial animations, and parry simulations, but also really absurdly good music and self-absorbed writing cosplaying as avant-garde moral philosophy. Beneath the shadow of the monolith, of course. I don't think they could have cast a better actor than Andy Serkis for Renoir. Every time he's on screen, I just shut up and listen. He's like a black queen. With the barrier breaker, the group head out to the monolith. Very, very small side note, but the artwork of the paintress on the map itself reminds me quite a lot of Don't Starve. In fact, the whole map in some ways reminds me of Don't Starve. What's going on here, guys? Maëlle breaks the barrier apart, and the group prepare for anti-paintress shenanigans. The path leading to the paintress is laden with candles, almost as though the expeditioners are walking to a funeral. Or a mourning. Maëlle, with fragments of her mind as Alicia coming back to her, knows that what they're attacking might not be the paintress. With this, Maëlle sees Aline in her true form, or at least her true form within the canvas. Because Lune and Ciel are Aline's creations, along with every other human, she can choose to burn them at will, evidently. Maëlle is sort of Aline's creation, and we'll get to that later when the story reveals it. The Verso within the canvas is also Aline's creation, but she clearly doesn't want to kill him. Knowing this, he forces Aline's hand by threatening to burn himself alive, forcing Aline to stop. So, look, there is a very predictable overlap between people who believe that Aline should be allowed to grieve within the canvas and people who think that the life within the canvas is actually sentient. For those people, consider what you just saw. Aline is straight up burning her own daughter alive. She's burning multiple people alive and only stopping because her son threatened to kill himself. This woman doesn't just need to be stripped away from the canvas, she needs to be put on watch and thrown in a straitjacket. We know Aline recognizes Alicia now because she recognizes her later, just like she recognizes Verso now. And later. She's completely lost the plot, and there is zero excuse on the part of anyone with an IQ above 85 who tries to justify letting her stay within the canvas. Aline relents and scurries back into the monolith. Verso instructs everyone to follow her, while also himself stepping backwards, and I always found that annoying. He does not show leadership qualities, and not even Lune thinks to make him go first, just to make sure he's not doing anything tricky. I mean, he moved to save Mael earlier, not CL or Lune, and now he's telling everyone, wink wink, to follow the paintress while he hangs back with Mael. Characters behaving in strange ways, what's new?
We are inside the monolith?
Yes, we are now inside the monolith, an amalgamation of Aline's memories, artistic concepts, and life in general. All that permeates throughout the canvas elsewhere can be found as a concept in here. Verso, Alicia, Renoir, the maps themselves, and the creations of Aline. Somehow there are also Nevrons within the monolith. Wait, so here's the thing. Renoir is currently trapped beneath the monolith. He has been for nearly 70 years, so he, in all of his power, can't get into the monolith. But Clair, who created the Nevrons to kill Aline's creations and trap their chroma within their bodies, so Aline can't get the chroma back, can get her Nevrons into the monolith? What? I know Clair is supposed to be the most powerful thing that ever was, but her Nevrons aren't. How are they here? Did they come in after us? I didn't see them. Doesn't matter. I had learned up to this point to just not look too deeply at what I was seeing on screen because the story is just trying to facilitate the familial conflict of the Descendres instead of answering what seems to be plot holes in its logic. I just get annoyed, you know? Renoir is somehow in a stalemate with Aline despite having Clair's help, but is also strong enough to get his and Clair's creations into the monolith, whatever. Maybe the idea is that since we've broken the barrier, Nevrons are flooding in? Who knows? The monolith functionally acts as a walk down memory lane, and in more ways than one. Previous parts of the continent, which were traversed to arrive at the main story's progression, are all thrown in as mini versions of themselves.
Up there. She's the paintress. She's up there.
Jennifer English's take on dramatic and tired, fittingly becoming very tired at this point in the game. Mael is always talking like English is her third language and she just woke up. Spit it out, goddammit. First, we have Spring Meadows. Music from this area and its lush greenery nice and relaxing for my sensibilities. The Lanciers calling back to a simpler time, back to when this game's shortcomings were covered up by novelty and the obscured nature of the story, and what a time that was. This area features some loot and a bishop that fianchettos my non-existent interest in fighting more large HP'd enemies. Maya and the gang come across a shadowed memory of Aline, teaching her children to paint. Lune comments on the finding.
Teaching her children to paint, huh?
You might think that I'm about to attack Lune for commenting on the obvious here, but actually it's just the opposite. Because the player is used to obscure shit happening in Expedition 33, we don't really think to have a conversation in our heads about things like this. Would not Lune and CL, at the very least, have something to say about the fact that their lives up to this point have been completely ignorant to what's going on in their world? That memories of deities are being displayed in real time in front of them? Or that a god of their world almost just burned them alive at less than snaps of fingers? They have almost nothing to say about any of it, and there is absolutely zero character transformation on their part because of it. Mael might be annoying as she struggles to get her words out, but at least the developers are trying to show that she's experiencing massive internal conflict. But Lune and CL are the exact same people they have always been. CL is not struggling to keep out a pessimistic view of the world despite having every reason to, and Lune is not struggling to keep her composure as the analytical by-the-book expeditioner, despite the vast majority of the expedition going as anything but planned. It's almost like they're not actually sentient beings capable of such things. It's almost like they're creations made in the image of humans, but with the complexity only afforded to them by what the paintress was willing to paint them with at any given point. You know, we come to a strange dance of critique then. Are these characters suffering from a lack of realistic depth because Sandfall Interactive is doing them a disservice with underwhelming writing, or are these characters suffering from a lack of depth because Sandfall Interactive is genius and are communicating to us that these two things aren't actually people with that sort of mental firepower? I think the latter option is a stretch. In all likelihood, these two characters characters are suffering from a severe case of underdevelopment and not a canon lack of sentience. And that is just the conclusion that I'm arbitrarily going to have to stick with because I see the alternative as giving the studio too much credit. In the memory, we see Aline teaching Clea, Alicia, and Verso the fundamentals of painting. She was carefully animated to display signs of being deeply involved with their development, as we see her pacing, going back and forth, commenting as she looks at their work. The crew happen upon a gestural merchant who says he ended up in the monolith by accident when the tremors began and the ground started floating. Clearly, this gestural has been stuck here since the fracture in Monolith Year 100, the poor guy. Let's kick his ass to make him feel better. The next area is the miniature flying waters with all of its weak to lightning foes, then the ancient sanctuary and gestural village with their little sack of potatoes. But wait, these enemies are Verso creations. So did Aline look at the landscape and add detail to the monolith based on what she found, or does this monolith inherit the features of the canvas abroad? This is the same principle that we talked about earlier with Verso and Renoir's poetic schneeb-schnabbery. The closer you look, the less it makes sense, but the closer you look, the more uncultured and annoyed you seem to everyone around you, so you can't really do too much and remain respected, can you? Easy choice for me, obviously. The group moves onto the mini stonewall cliffs. Just as shown in the original area, the deep relief carving of the paintress hanging her head into her arms, though her foot is missing. What did you do, Minoko? Just kidding, her foot's missing in the other version too. There is a Tatanka battle in this area, right next to a windmill. If you burn the windmill, Mytha's poison dissipates and you can fight her unimpeded. You can also gain access to another manor entrance, which leads to Aline's glass house on top of the manor. She laments the death of her son, and just as Renoir's shadow alluded to in Old Lumiere, Aline is most destroyed by the fact that there were so many memories she could have had with Verso that are now lost forever. The concept of not being able to accept things as they are, not how we want them to be, is shown in its most destructive form in Aline. Moving past the mini-cliffs, we're treated to Minoko's station. The snowy whites fit right into the category of relaxing for me. I'm a sucker for fantasy greens, typical trees, creeks, and other meadowy standards. I know a lot of people find that setting boring, but I just can't shake the fact that it appeases my mind in some primal way. In contrast, snow often does the opposite. For some reason, maybe because this game's settings are short-lived and very well designed from a color palette perspective, the snowy mountains on the train station are easy on my eyes. The audio associated with the deep trudging puts me to sleep, and the fact that the train station shakes hands with the poetic grandice is simply peaceful. Upon entering the mini-station, we're treated to another memory, this time of Alicia and Aline hashing it out. Alicia's mother obviously can't stand being around her daughter after Verso's death. Evidently, she blames her for the fire, and we're being treated to a glimpse into Alicia's relationship with Mama prior to being overwritten in the canvas. This is a really dumb point to bring up, but after Aline decides she can't be bothered to stay and argue with her daughter, when her character begins walking away, she changes directions a little before disappearing, and it just makes me wonder if the character's pathing was recorded somewhere in the manor, and there was like a table in the way, so she moves to the side, or maybe there's like a hidden wall in the train station. And since the memories aren't just animations, but actual characters with defined hitboxes, she has to like scoot on past the wall or something. I don't know. It just took me out of the immersion, you know? Is this a nitpick? This is a nitpick. I don't care though. These memories are supposed to be dramatic glimpses into the story that's unraveling before the player for the first time. So doing anything to bring them closer to Earth is only going to hurt their effect. It's the brown M&M's test, but for video games. If you can't be bothered to do the little things, which should be easy, why should I have any faith that you've gone all the way for the bigger things that require much, much more time investment? And as we've seen with the little things, they couldn't be bothered. And so, with the big things, they didn't. It's at this point in the story that if you've been taking your time to clear out at least most of the optional content, you'll be blazing through enemies. If you haven't, you're going to find these snowy train station enemies cumbersome. You may even be encouraged to skip them. And if you do skip them, you'll be weaker later on, which will encourage you to skip future foes, which will make you weaker, and so on. This is why it's very, very important to take your time collecting XP and weapon upgrades, and why the principle about ending fights before your opponents have a chance to get damage on you is so important. Someone who strives for that could be, theoretically, 20% more efficiently leveled than someone who doesn't. That is massive for both passive stats gained through leveling, but also for the amount of weapon scaling someone might have access to. Myself, on my white uniform playthrough, was absolutely melting through enemies enemies on a highly leveled Mael wielding Medallum. On my first playthrough, I wasn't quite prepared for how mixed the quality of the game was going to be, and so, frustratedly, I began trying to just squeak through the game, and it made everything far more annoying than it otherwise would have. Not unlike my first playthrough of another game on this channel. Take your time, melt the enemies, make use of free aim shots, and the rest of the game becomes that much more enjoyable. Verso's childlike spirit runs this here train station. It appears he had a bit of the tism within, eh? The boy turns back to admire his train. That's actually very cute. The train takes us to Mini Lumiere, and there's quite a few Clair Obscurs there, oy vey. White playthrough fine. First playthrough, I was running right past all of this. There's a problem coupled with the combat when you aren't teching into pure damage. It isn't just the case that enemies using abilities makes each fight last 3 times as long, and it does, but it's also the case that killing enemies using your abilities instead of just free aiming makes the fights take another 2 times as long on top of that. Since there are a healthy number of enemies in each area, what could take you 30 minutes to an hour to explore expands to at least thrice the time investment, and most of that is spent staring at animations you've seen before. It's a hard problem to intuit if you're not currently, as I speak, dealing with it yourself, but try to recall playing through this game. If you're not playing at optimal damage output and just free aiming everything, you quickly find yourself getting annoyed with loading into a fight, waiting for all of the animations to finish, and then getting your last taps in for minimal reward since, of course, these are not boss enemies or anything akin to it. This isn't just a problem in Clair Obscur, obviously. Even in games without turn-based mechanics, a flood of enemies has the effect of stretching game times to annoying lengths in seemingly unearned ways. But in turn-based games, especially, it is doubly annoying. Every end fight screen at this point in the game feels like it takes an eternity to load up and then go away as I spam my controller. The end of Lumiere is reached, and the gang is nearing the peak of the monolith. A vision of Renoir and Aline appears. From the shadows, painted Renoir takes their place.
We're taking her down.
She's not the only one who grieves. The pain of losing you, she made me inherited. Punishment, perhaps, for not being there when it mattered. I refuse to lose my son.
That son was a stranger.
But you're not. You're not.
You lost me years ago, and I lost you.
So you leave us no choice. Tell me, how are you different from her in doing this?
I'm tired.
So trust me. We are your family.
Family is complicated.
If saving you means losing you, then so be it.
If you were trying to find a time and place to show Verso as the villain of the story, this wouldn't be a bad spot to pick. Of course, Verso aims to save his mother and later his sister from the canvas. He also wants to end his life. But this scene makes it seem like he's doing all of this purely for his own sake, which, yeah, if that was the case, if he were truly indifferent towards his family, or what he was created to assume was his family, or their suffering, he'd be a pretty unlikable person. Of course, the dialogue makes sense anyway, and Painted Renoir makes a compelling case for his side of things. As he states, Aline painted him to feel the pain of Verso's death. Painted Verso, our Verso, points out that real Verso wasn't actually his son. And Renoir reminds us all that the two men in front of us have lived their entire fabricated lives together. When taking a step back, it's actually sort of admirable that Painted Renoir is going through such trouble to try and make the best of what is probably just a horrifying situation. I mean, imagine you'd come to find that your life was entirely fabricated and that what you thought was your family was actually just a bunch of fake memories that aren't actually yours. Sounds like an upgrade to me. Honestly, I feel for Painted Renoir here. What I don't understand is that if he were actually painted to resemble real Renoir, why doesn't he have the same concern for Aline that real Renoir has? Was he painted to not care about her suffering? Is that why he's more concerned with his own family and not the paintress herself? Just how much do real Renoir and painted Renoir match up in personality? Questions. In any case, our group has to fight Peignoir, and so begins the worst song of the entire game. For a great majority of this fight, the song playing over it features, from what I can gather, 2 male vocal performances and 1 feminine. The 2 male vocalists, whether one person over 2 tracks or 2 separate vocalists, feature 1 strong masculine set of lyrics sung in a fairly aggressive, fairly touched up method. It sounds like it's been put through a computer and has quite a bit of work put into it to make it almost unnaturally even. To complement this is a male falsetto that just shoves the aggression of the other male vocals out of the way in an almost chaotic manner. The falsetto, I swear to God, reminds me of SpongeBob. I just hear SpongeBob, like, gasping or hollering something. I really do not like the choice of singing styles that were chosen for the song, and I am sure structurally they serve a purpose, but the song has to sound good first, no? The feminine vocals are great, no problems there, but the music itself is electronic sounding, driving drums that probably worked in concept, but because the whole piece is so disjointed, it detracts from the fight at hand. At some point in the song, the piece slows down and returns to that very catchy fight theme with the catchy percussions and an allegro orchestral arrangement. That I like. What I don't like is the soap opera storytelling in the form of falsetto screaming that just grinds my gears. Painted Renoir took me quite a few tries on my first playthrough, so I had to sit through this for quite a while. I do not recommend it. At around 40% of Renoir's HP, he summons his lion to start a second phase. And isn't that just a really weird coincidence that this patriarchal figure has a lion spirit thing protecting him, or augmenting him, or cuddling with him? I've been pretty coy with the Elden Ring references, but honestly, this is starting to get a little heavy-handed. Humans using lions to represent masculine strength or leadership or whatever is not really a good writing tool or cliche, and hasn't been ever since city bros with trucks began slapping stickers with lions all over their rear windows. Lions, not sheep, they all scoffed in unison. Renoir's second phase is basically the same as his first, but now this lion is going to pop out of nowhere, and it's good luck first timing this fucking thing. His moves are purposefully hard to read. It's just, we've been here before, you know. Christopher Magnus has a name for games that do this. He calls them do-it-again stupid titles. The idea being that the game is designed from the ground up to kill you in ways you couldn't have possibly foreseen, so that you have to subject yourself to a learning pattern that is basically just gated by however long it takes to respawn and try again. Consort Radon is probably the most egregious form of this as a whole across the world and all of the games within it, along with Elden Ring as a game, but for people who aren't Souls vets, this lion probably comes close. His moves can be learned, just look out for the 360 kick, unless you're playing with Minoko, who gets an 8.5% damage boost when hit by a foot. After slaying the Renoir, he begins to do his special "if I can't have it, no one can" move, but is interrupted by, guess who? Why, it's real Renoir, the curator. The curator and real Renoir, of course, are the same person. Painted Renoir tries to save his own life by telling Renoir that fake Verso is the only tie that real Renoir has to real Verso, and honestly, me describing this to you is more confusing than just understanding this game by playing it. But real Renoir does not buy that shit at all, and why would he? He's only spent the last 67 years fighting to save Aline, my god. Renoir takes his daughter's hand and shows her how to gamage skinwalkers. Before dying, Peignoir gives his last words.
Did it, Gustav.
Why would Maël say this after killing Renoir? Was that a goal of Gustav's? I think not. Lune has some questions for Maël, and although I understand that some questions need to be asked after all that's happened, I do wonder why Painted Renoir didn't ever try to properly communicate with any of the expeditioners to try and get them to turn on Verso. He, as we've seen, knows that what Verso wants doesn't actually help them. If Lune, Ciel, and Maël learn about what Verso planned to do and that real Renoir is, in a way, the cause of the gamage in the first place, they'd have probably fought the most obvious enemies to their cause. A lot of his plight could have been avoided, to be honest. The gang moves towards the future of Lumiere, what every expedition has worked towards. Renoir's death gives the gang a revival Pictos, which brings back the character once per death, and that's pretty wild. Upon the Monolith Peak, the next enemy you'll face is the Paintress, which means there aren't any enemies to farm the revival Pictos on. Either apply to Mael and chug through the fight, or leave and farm it on Nevs. The area doesn't allow for you to teleport to Monolith Peak straight from the start, so coming back after leaving is actually a pain in the ass, so just going straight to the fight is ideal, I would say. As a matter of fact, it almost seems like Sandfall didn't want you to experience Renoir's fight hours apart from the Paintresses, so they just had each one right next to each other.
We need to be as prepared as possible. Once we go up, there's no turning back.
Why they had Minoko say this line, when it's actually not true that you can't turn back once initiating the fight with the Paintress, is just strange. If the idea is that once they fight the Paintress, it's either life or death, okay, but that's actually just true for all of the fights, so I don't know why, again, he would say this. Just like other fights in the game, once you die to the opponent, you can just not reset the fight and then leave. You're not locked into it. Just like Mael's long ago comments about buffing Picti through the Curator, it seems Sandfall tossed this line in here for gravitas and not any meaningful communication with the player. The Paintress is decaying. We see her chroma dissipate from her body in real time, and the entire character embodies the essence of something that is clinging by the thinnest of threads to the world around her. Just as the remaining fragments of humanity stare at the monolith with sorrow from Lumiere, the Paintress, from the monolith, stares right back, with the right wise cant of the Eiffel Tower looming far away from any of the troubles of the expedition.
Alicia.
Alicia.
Your face.
My face. What about my face? Are you going to burn it again?
Alicia's your daughter.
And Mael reminds you of her.
Wow. She's so perceptive. Lune then states that, in the end, they really were the Clair Obscur Expedition 33 narrative-driven turn-based RPG all along. Aline, the Paintress, recognizes her children, but is so tormented by the thought of them being pieces of a Renoir trick that she turns away from them. Instead of harboring love, disdain. Team Blue, at this point, asking if I really think Renoir is the good guy of this story when he causes Aline to feel things like this. And may I remind you that Verso and, to a different degree, Mael are both Aline creations. She's quite literally driving herself mad, not Renoir. Aline notices that Alicia's face isn't burnt, commenting,
Your face.
My face. What about my face? Are you going to burn it again?
The double entendre referring to the fact that Aline just tried to burn her own daughter alive, but that Alicia's face is actually burnt, delivering a sorrowful line which, perhaps, suggests remnants of Alicia's past still alive in Mael, even if she isn't aware of them. Something about the way Lune looks left to right, trying to find someone named Alicia in the party irks me. Why does she look so cartoony? Like, why can't she just glance around quickly? Because the devs need us to know that Lune is curious about what's going on. It is good for Verso's sake, I would say, that the only two people who would be around to put two and two together on behalf of Mael are actually clueless about everything. Mael just performed a gamage. The only thing that looks like the Paintress took a special interest in her, and Verso has been very obviously untrustworthy from the get-go, but nay, they keep pointing out obvious things and then moving past any reasonable questions to facilitate the story happening.
Come along. Let's go home.
Yes. You need to go home.
Dude, say literally anything else to not make it sound like you just don't care about spending time with your mother. Of course she's going to react negatively to this. Just say, yeah, let's go home, Verso, you fucking Morongo Resort Casino and Spa. Man, I fucking despise Lune's combat stance. Sassily holding her hand up, fucking TikTok hand turned into an elemental weapon on top of a social one. Team Blue applauds. CL is a tarot card reader. Team Blue applauds. Verso lean forward hair. Team Blue applauds. Young girl given freedom to make her own decisions to the detriment of both her and everyone around her and the society she lives in, and her actual real family who is trying to fight a literal war without her help because she is now killing herself in a fantasy. Team Blue applauds. Female swimsuits acquired by playing through really shit side quests. Team Red applauds. Complicated mathematics combining effects for massive number go up gameplay. Autistic. Team Red applauds. A little something for everyone by an artistically inclined French studio. Game of the year. And now we're going to get get to a decade of Souls-like games with cringe writing, cringe self-inserts, and you fucking know the music isn't going to be anywhere near what these two drummed up, but maybe better graphics. Ugh, it's gonna be trash. I don't blame Sandfall for what's going to come, and you better believe that I'm glad they stuck to their vision and made Clair Obscur the way they did, but we gotta call a spade a spade. There are some absolutely dreadful problems in this game that go just beyond the gameplay itself. The vast majority of people playing it just do not seem to have the wherewithal to drop their emotions and see the forest for the trees, and why do I get upset over this kind of thing? It's nothing new, is it? Every top comment for anything related to this game, for those who come after, when one falls, not if, when. Tomorrow comes. You guys are all so fucking proud of yourselves, aren't you? You did it. You made the reference, and every time you go to bed, you can think about how you'll never play another game that will make you feel this way. You'll never experience anything this incredible. No woman will ever be able to live up to CL now that you've beaten Clair Obscur, and how could she? How could any woman with this much going for herself be attracted to you? Look at you. You're disgusting. Why did they have to kill off Gustav so early? No man will ever be able to live up to witty hotface. You played as this guy for maybe 2 hours. He's a very simple character, and you're all just so enamored with this title. I don't fucking get you. You're all mentally ill, and it's a shame that your vote is equal to mine. Remember, it isn't just boomers being raised to lack strong principles and familial ties or material generosity that is destroying the West. It is also their children, your parents, who inherited an astonishingly broken collective sense of apathy towards duty, and you, their offspring, and your offspring, who have failed to adapt to the new world by establishing clear sets of social responsibilities necessary for the healthy proliferation of civilized peoples. These people who created the hardships we all have to deal with, the anchors of our world. When this society collapses in on itself, it isn't going to be the armed Protestant theocrats with strong familial ties, the construction workers, the carpenters, the mechanics, the plumbers, the electricians, nor the farmers, nor the career criminals who suffer. It is going to be the useless bourgeoisie and the disenfranchised youths, the academics, the professors, the students, the adult children crying in Disneyland or spending a quarter of their annual income on Funko Pops, the people who live off the internet, the writers, and the critics, and the people without standards, without duty, whose taste in art betrays the fact that they have failed to inherit a sense of pride in the creations they absorb or the work they do that will be the first to drop. And they're not coming for your food, they're not coming for your water, they're not coming for the bare necessities. You'd better weapon up, asshole, because they're coming for all of it. The Paintress is a really fun fight. The moves that are hard to read are also relatively low damage, so you have time to adapt. Despite not having access to the uncapped damage Pictos, her HP is reasonably balanced so that anyone, even people who haven't leveled very efficiently, can kill her in a reasonable amount of time, and this is where having capped damage is a strength for Sandfall. Because even under-leveled parties are basically, at this point, going to be doing 10k damage per swing, the Paintress can be leveled around everyone dealing roughly the same damage, even this late into the game. Would I prefer naturally uncapped damage? Yes, but Sandfall is playing to their strengths here, and it wouldn't be fair to not point out how fluid the Paintress feels for what I have to imagine as anyone who managed to get this far into the game. The music. Even a broken record like myself sounds amazing when the record is this game's soundtrack. The song played during the Paintress's fight takes the drama of Renoir's fight theme and reigns in the variables. Feminine vocals backed by more feminine vocals that don't clash with each other. This fight is, in a lot of ways, mostly about Maëlle regaining her powers as a paintress and about her relationship with her mother, so having the vocals be female ties the essence of this fight together well. This fight is three-phased. Of course, every woman needs at least two. The Paintress hops in her mech, and Verso calls upon Esquier, tossing Sori into his mouth, giving him the ability to fly. Verso has had Sori, presumably for the entire playthrough, but has kept it hidden from the expedition because, as he later says, he was afraid that upon receiving the ability to fly, that the expedition would head back home. The thing is, the expedition gained the ability to get back home when Esquier got Flory. If the expeditions can sail to the continent, they can sail back. I don't care what the map looks like. So why make him being afraid of the expedition going home the reason for what the fuck ever am I even complaining about anymore? The second phase kicks in and the music is so damn good. Take a look at the expeditioners in these frames. This animation is so bad it's unbelievable. The longer you look at it, the worse it becomes. Their feet are clipping our Paintress just took a max damage tick from 5 stacks of burn, which leads me to ask the question, is there any point pursuing burn builds in this game? We just complimented the damage system and now we've got to insult it. Because burns only apply once per turn, no matter how many burn sticks you put onto an opponent, there's really no point in investing into a burn build at all. This is the final boss of the game and I only need 5 stacks of burn to max tap her? What is the point of Bruellum in 95% of the game, anyway?
Arrogant man. I taught him to paint, and he seeks to use my creations against me.
Okay, so she does know that everyone fighting her is her creation and not Renoir's. Gonna chalk this one up to her being crazy. Aline harshly barks at Alicia, directly blaming her for Verso's death.
Foolish child, you defied me, and now he's dead.
This is a pretty damning hit against her character and contrasts like Twee and Law to her journal entry found in the glass house, where she states that the reason she can't be around Alicia is because her sadness reflects back into Aline. Here, she seems to really blame Alicia for Verso's death, and I think the game is trying to juggle her character as an antagonist without making her a villain, but of course, given what we know about what she's doing to her family in this very moment, we could have come to the conclusion that she is one hours ago. The Expecringeners kill the Complaintress, and now Maëlle does the Maëlle thing. And so begins Phase 3. Aline is so mentally unwell that she begins a healing the XPs. It's a very touching moment that doesn't get ruined by the character's voice lines in any way.
What lovely feet.
Maëlle changes her pitch up. Maëlle smacks her bitch up. Aline takes in the moment as her daughter performs a gamage. And she knew, then and there, that Maëlle was, in fact, her daughter. Verso is so overwhelmed with emotions, but Lune and Ciel are oblivious to what happened. They know the Paintress died, but they just refuse to consider what it might mean that Maëlle can perform a gamage, or that the Paintress seemed to know her. Maëlle shows confusion at the situation, but this is the extent of her resolve in questioning. She plants Expedition 33's flag at the peak of the monolith. I just don't like you, man. Verso is the least trustworthy person of the group from the XP's perspective. We know that. The XPs have not taken a reasonable amount of care questioning Verso, and we know that. To rub salt into the wound that is my downvote against this writing, Lune and Ciel seemed completely undisturbed by the fact that Verso and Minoko are both somber and almost sad on the return trip to Lumiere, and I was just so done at this point. Even on my first playthrough, I knew something was about to happen that the XPs weren't going to like. Hell, I could figure that the moment Minoko destroyed the structure in Old Lumiere, but alas, nothing happened. The crew get back to Lumiere and are greeted as heroes in front of the whole citizenry. All 40 of them. Ciel does a weird facial animation, and Esquier does a merchandise dance. The man-boy who did a weird face at the beginning of the game is told 2 things. 1, that he isn't going to die at the age of 15 anymore, and 2, that Gustav perished on the expedition. So, naturally, he behaves as any child would, by completely disregarding that he isn't going to die and running away in disbelief that someone else, instead, has died. Verso sits upon the harbor's edge and retrieves that letter his sister gave him. It reads,
Brother, I tire of the conflicts and deceptions that plague our family and theirs. So, I entrust you with this letter. Whether you give it to her is up to you. I'm at peace with what's to come. When the time comes, I hope you will be too. Maëlle, it's a strange feeling watching you with my brother, laughing and smiling, without the scars or the memories that afflict me. Alicia, as she was meant to be, not this painted version that I am. My family, a facsimile of yours, and this world, a mirror, painted by your mother, the Paintress, to stave off her grief. Seeing your expedition through would plunge us all into the abyss. For in ridding the world of the Paintress, you'd lose the sole force standing against the one who would erase us, the one who invokes the flowers of the gommage. an act of love. For he does love her. Your father. On her monolith, she paints a warning for us all, of the few she can save as her power wanes. We all wish for our families to thrive. Your family, however, believes only one can survive. But perhaps you'll find another way. You who have lived amongst us, perhaps you differ from your father and your sister, as I differ from mine. Your mother paints life, whilst your father, death. What will you paint?
And there's the big reveal. The Descendre family is a family of painters, people who can create whole worlds with their gift. The entire world the game is based in, a painting. The canvas, the work of Verso, who, as a child, created the Gestrels, the Grandis, Esquier, and Minocco. The people of Lumiere and the painted family creations of Aline, who was so distraught over her son's death, she tried to avail herself of the pain by recreating her family, including Verso and his childhood canvas. Over time, Aline's health began to deteriorate in the real world due to how much time she was spending in the canvas. In an attempt to get his wife back from grief, Real Renoir, as represented by the curator, began his campaign to destroy the canvas. And here we have the anchor for our plot. Renoir is trying to destroy the canvas to save Aline. Aline, not willing to accept reality for what it is, stops Renoir from getting to her by trapping him beneath the monolith. Because the two were in a stalemate, Clair created the Nevrons to sap chroma away from Aline over time. If you remember, all of the dead expeditioners that 33 came across had their chroma still trapped in their bodies. This is Clair's design. The idea being that over time, Aline will have less and less chroma to use to fight Renoir since her creations aren't being recycled into the canvas as chroma, thus expediting her departure from the canvas. This is also why the gamage happens once per year. Aline is losing her power and can't sustain the life of her oldest creations. Every year, the last generation of citizens in Lumiere are gamaged not out of spite, but out of necessity. We're treated to a glimpse of the past. Alicia, prior to entering the canvas, Clair beckons her to Renoir's atelier. Along the way, you can spot a sleeping Minocco and Noko, along with hanged frames of the Descendre family's artwork. What looks to be early concepts of Esquier, Gobelou, Citizens of Lumiere, and what I think is supposed to be the mansion on fire, which is pretty fucking bleak if you ask me. Hey, Renoir, if you're trying to make your wife feel better, let's start with not having a continuous reminder of her son burning alive in a living room, huh, pal? Meeting Clair, we see Renoir's art of Verso, the visages, the holler, representative of Clair, carrying the burden of the family on her back, and of Sirène, playing with wonder. We see the Clair Obscur creation, and a number of other paintings, though I was never able to spot Alicia's Axon, the Reacher. Enter Clair. Hi, Clair. Feet! Remember that this is a glimpse into the past, moments before Alicia enters the canvas prior to all of the events of Expedition 33. Clair says that Renoir is wasting his time trying to help someone who doesn't want his help, which is rather callous. She also mentions that the war with the Riders is spreading, and that she has a lot of work to do if we painters are to survive, which implies that the Descendre family is just one of the many families in the world where writers, who are always the good guys, best guys, cool guys, and the guys you should become a patron of, link in the description, are their enemies. Clair suggests that Alicia should enter the canvas to try and help Renoir to get Aline out. Not because she cares if Aline gets to deal with her grief, but only because she needs Renoir's help in fighting the war. Alicia agrees, and before I painted her into the canvas, I ran around the room periodically on one of my playthroughs. There's this painting here of Maëlle facing off against what I assume is an early concept art of the paintress, which means that the artwork found in the mansion has to be concept art and not necessarily anything lore specific. Which is cool on one hand, but on the other hand does make it a little cumbersome trying to figure out what art is a cue into the nature of the story and what art is just kind of there. When approaching the canvas, Alicia has some troubled thoughts. On the one hand, she blames herself for Verso's death and wants to help resolve her family's conflict. On the other, she has thoughts about wanting to be able to speak again, and to live life not burdened by her wounds. Before entering, Alicia hides the canvas. In a world where everyone is designed to be a 10 out of 10, Clair's face is exceptionally biteable.
And that means stopping the final sliver of Verso's soul from painting.
Do you hear that, Team Blue? All the things you like about Mael's ending only exist because Verso's soul is being used as a slave to maintain the fabrications that you find so endearing, you buffoons.
She's a girl. She's a girl. She's beautiful. What a lovely voice.
The game can be absolutely beautiful. Beautiful music, beautiful direction. The graphics can be beautiful. The art is beautiful. Look, I get it, okay? I'm not saying I don't get it. Scenes like that aren't just pretty on their own. And they are pretty on their own, but in the full context of the game, they are absolutely breathtaking. I can give credit where credit is due. Act 3 sees a return to Lumiere. Alicia has repainted herself into the canvas as Mael, post-Gamage, and she meets with Verso, who is waiting patiently for Renoir to begin destroying the canvas. We can infer through Mael's hair that perhaps she's been here for quite some time.
I prefer Mael.
I think I do too. But I'm not really Verso, and you're not really Mael, are you?
You're not Verso, no. You look and sound just like him, but you're you. I'm still Mael, though.
Verso's reaction to Alicia claiming to be Mael is fairly significant. We can see already that he knows what's going to happen when Renoir tries to destroy the canvas. Alicia is addicted to this fake world, just as her mother was.
It's not make-believe. It's not. You're not to me.
It's not make-believe to her, which means it is. Renoir appears and the two go to meet him. Mael is convinced that her father will help her repaint the canvas, and I have to redo this take again because my dogs are walking in and out of the fucking room. Mael is convinced that Papa will help her repaint the canvas, now that it's hidden, and Aline doesn't know where it has been hidden. Also, you gain access to the painted power pictos now. That 9,999 damage cap is removed, praise the gods. The game uncapped 30 minutes before it all ends. Isn't that fun?
I thought I told you to stay home.
Technically, my body's at home.
Some of Eline's finest work.
There is something about the fact that I can hear the pianist's fingers making contact with the keys as they play, and the chairs the musicians are sitting on creaking, and all those little imperfections the microphones are picking up in the studio that endears me to this scene. It feels comfy, you know? Paired with Andy Serkis's voice, it feels doubly so. After a long wait, Renoir begins destroying the canvas. With it, Verso begins to gamage. He looks like he can't believe, after all of this time, that he finally gets to rest. And yet, look who decides to fuck it all up for him. Right in front of his face, Mael, and all of her childish self-serving schneep-schnobbery says, no. I'd like to end the game here, but alas, we gotta stick this one out. And thank God we're back at the best place in the entire game, the camp, oh joy. Mael is trying to revive the clueless goons, so Verso helps her out by telling her that painting isn't about verisimilitude, but essence. In other words, painting is not about the strict accuracy to life, but capturing the essence of a thing. The objective of a director isn't to capture the frame, but to show the audience the frame of the frame, and for the photographer, to take the photograph of reality. A common theme across very advanced aspects of a medium. Using this philosophy, Mael succeeds in summoning her biteables.
How did we got marched? Wow, your hair.
Really? You died, came back to life, and the only thing you can talk about is your friend's new hairstyle.
So you were her daughter? And you were a paintress too?
So cool, right?
And you knew this whole time? You fucking coward! You betrayed us!
No kidding, Lune. He lied? Whose fault is that? You only had a million opportunities to see that he was untrustworthy. At that point, it's your fault. In keeping with our theme of CL being totally unable to press Verso on his bullshit, she just skips right past what's going on and asks if Mael can bring everyone from Lumiere back alive. Great. Team Blue hopeful. Also, did you guys notice that Mael has access to enough chroma to bring back Lune and CL, but not Gustav? Wouldn't that be the first thing she'd do? Like, objectively, the first thing she'd even consider would be to bring back Gustav. Even if she doesn't have enough chroma for Lune, CL, and Gustav, she'd for sure just bring him back first regardless. What gives? Oh, the voice actor probably did all of his lines before this part of the game and they didn't want to pay to bring him back, or because Verso is still alive, it would be weird to have two characters with the same weapon lineup occupy the space at the same time. Or whatever, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense. Fucking lazy. Ugh. Also, I realize we're at the end of the game here, and so things are just falling apart rapidly, but Lune and CL should be having a full-on crisis right now. Their entire lives are fabricated, fake, not real, bullshit. Their whole being can be snapped away or recreated in an, rough verisimilitude. And it's on command, and just like every single other aspect of this game that would require hours of digestion, Lune and CL simply have nothing to say about this. Lune is mad that Verso lied, CL is indifferent, and Mael is losing her marbles. That's all that's going on here. If these are real people with real feelings and real depth, you've done a good job at convincing me of the opposite, Sandfall. At this point in the game, you can decide to go around on a flying SKA and do content that Sandfall would call a late game content, though I'd call it adjacent to bonus rounds or superfluous challenge stuff. Late game content as a term implies that the content is still functioning within the context of the game, but really, beyond defeating Renoir and maybe learning about Clay and the Reacher, everything else in this game, and its late game content, feels like bonus content, designed to let you experiment with Mael's new Paintress abilities, which hit for quite a lot of damage. As for the Reacher, the axon Renoir made to represent Mael, watching Painted Alicia decide on ending her life in front of Verso without giving him a proper goodbye hug even felt pretty bad. Almost forced bad, in the sense that Verso later half scolds Mael because he didn't get a proper goodbye, but honestly that was Policia's choice, not Mael's. There doesn't seem to be a reason that Alicia would make this decision except for, obviously, Sandfall's desire to brew cheap conflict. This is, after all, a soap opera. When flying up to reach Painted Alicia, who was painted over by real Clay to produce Nevrons nonstop in a slavish manner, you're treated to a skill testing fight that would have you fight against super versions of all the Nevrons you'd fought throughout the game. I say would have you because in my white playthrough I took out 95% of her HP before she could really do anything. Painted Clay is momentarily freed from Clay's influence, and seeing that she'll soon be taken over once again, she orders her creations to kill her. Whether or not this means that Clay found a way to gamage herself, or simply freed herself from enslavement via suicide, isn't exactly clear, and by gamage I simply mean escaping the canvas. Clearly she didn't gamage in the way the Lumierans would. Clay is arguably the most powerful person in the entire Descentré family. Despite this, she doesn't personally come into the canvas to help Renoir save Aline during the game's lifespan. All of her contribution is conducted through her creations that were made prior to Mael's birth. It is arguable that Clay could have been powerful enough to eventually yank Aline out of the canvas all on her own, and in a much shorter time than the 16 years that it took Mael and the 67 years that it took Renoir, if she had the will. But during the glimpse into the past, we can see that Clay displays an extraordinary disinterest in donating any of her time to her family and solving what she sees as a child's issue. Her mother doesn't want to be saved. Renoir refuses to accept that, and to Clea, that means that the both of them are wasting their time. A lot of people seem to think this gives Clea a borderline psychopathic personality, and given the sheer horror the painted version of her went through to eventually kill herself, I can understand coming to that conclusion. But as you might imagine, I simply don't ultimately agree with the idea at all. First, Clay is clearly an empathetic person, as we can see with her relationship to Verso. She states clearly that everyone in the family is grieving, which includes her. So we know she's going through her own personal battles. Second, Clay makes it known that she's aware that everything in the canvas is a fabrication. She refers to Aline's painted family as fake, and she treats all of her creations in the canvas, including hers, as tools to an end, nothing more. So to say that she's putting a living being with true self-awareness and, for lack of a better word, a soul through torture is disingenuous. These beings aren't actually living or feeling in the way they purport to feel. They are merely behaving in step with the imagination of the painter who endowed them with an imperfect image of another person, or amalgamations of other people. So Clay's behavior towards the hauler, Simon, who we'll get to, or Painted Clay, is nothing worse than someone's behavior towards characters in a video game. they're entirely fictional. I think the sheer intrigue surrounding Clair is multifaceted. Admittedly, one has to contend with the fact that Sandfall didn't get a chance to ruin her character because so little of it is shown. We know she's powerful, we know she's pretty, and we know where she stands on the canvas issue. Those three things are enough to keep the player thinking about her in the vaguest of terms, and in the same way we might with other characters, apply our own thoughts and feelings onto Clair, so that we can better relate to her. In my own way, I can completely understand Clair being disgusted with her father's image of her in the Holler. And since she was also dismayed by her mother's creation of painted Clair, we can probably piece together that Clair doesn't like anyone else speaking for her, or giving descriptions of her without her being there to correct people who would otherwise misrepresent her character. I actually think this is a really interesting character space not often explored, and leaves Sandfall the option to pursue DLC with Clair, I hope. But all the same, the character still has not gotten fleshed out, and a DLC edition would grant Sandfall the opportunity to ruin or make legendary Clair's legacy. The last piece of late-game content I'd like to talk about is Simon. This guy was a member of Expedition Zero, with Painted Renoir and Verso way back in the day. He had fallen in love with Painted Clair, who of course he only knew as Clair. After the real Clair de Cendré captured Painted Clair, Simon became motivated to save her, though he wouldn't know for a long time that the quest he was undertaking was one of folly. Guising herself as Painted Clair, the real Clair manipulated Simon into killing her father's representation of her, which he did. Dutifully. This is why you can see the felled axon, the Holler, in Old Lumiere. The work of Simon as manipulated by Clair. Believing that the chroma from the axon would lead him to breaking the barrier, thus incorrectly believing he would be led to saving Painted Clair, Simon was struck lowly to find that the barrier wouldn't yield to him. Taking advantage of his desperate state, Aline, in the form of the Curatress, convinced Simon that the only way to save Painted Clair was to defeat he who was responsible for the gommage, Renoir. Thus, if you venture into Renoir's drafts, under the ocean itself, you'll find many of his creations, and Simon sits among them. Of course, Simon isn't a Renoir creation. After venturing into Renoir's drafts, where Renoir himself was being kept via Aline's power, Simon found it increasingly difficult to resist Renoir's influence. Eventually, he lost his will and was locked away in the drafts. He represents the most difficult boss in the game, and more than any other enemy, ultimately represents the do-it-again, stupid design of modern Souls-like mechanics. More than that, Simon represents an absolute tragedy, a man whose love was ripped from him, then held just out of reach as a carrot on a stick to make him do others' bidding. Ultimately, he would fail against powers beyond his comprehension, and be left to sit in an indefinite state of sorrow and emptiness. There are many late-game bosses to find, but I really think those three, the Reacher, Clair, and Simon, are the only ones worth pursuing. You can also take a little detour to do a little lore development into Lune's parents, who were part of a previous expedition, perished, of course. Aside from these exceptions, and they are barely exceptions, there's nothing else worth doing in Clair Obscur's endgame. Chief problem in this stage of the game is that none of the gameplay is truly fun on its own, separate from the context that gives the player motivation to play. I mean, it can be fun, and I'm sure you can find a few autists out there who love seeing number go up with this kind of party-based gameplay, but for the vast majority of players, and most certainly for myself, the fact that the only thing left to do to save Maëlle, or Alicia, is to somewhat ironically defeat Renoir, means that nothing else truly matters. In fact, it really feels like nothing else in the game is even really part of the game itself. Everything else here, aside from the examples mentioned, feels like content that would be unlocked through the main menu after completing the main story. Side content, goofy challenges. Not very important, and finally, nothing I'd like to recommend to you today. If you don't decide to do endgame content, you can go complete the final half hour of the game at any time. Flying back to Lumiere, our friends begin the final battle of the expedition. Summoning basic versions of the Lumieran citizens with the impure chroma found on dead bodies along the continent, Maëlle begins an assault on Renoir. As you spring through the battle, zombified citizens appear, fighting Renoir's creations. The player will find themselves in a familiar, though altogether different place than what they remember from the beginning of the game. And just as the game began on this rooftop, so too does it draw to an end. Posters of the Paintress, Esquier, and Sirène still stuck to shoddily constructed walls. Eventually, Renoir takes the zombified expeditioners and uses them for his own purposes, driving home the theme of these things being lifeless pawns with complicated designs and behavior, moving limbs to the tune of the Descentré family's inability to make honest contact with reality. You can find a fragment of Verso's soul, who can't help but compliment his mother's creation in Lumiere, but also derides the fact that his mother doesn't understand what it means for his soul to be held hostage as the force keeping the canvas alive. If you think Clair is immoral for what she did to the painted version of her, what does this make Maëlle and Aline as they torment Verso's soul for their own gain? Ahead, an opera house, where Verso's soul very literally performs among the carnage of the battle. I see a lot of notes being played, but I don't hear a lot of notes to match them. All surface level, no depth? Is this consistent from Sandfall? Just before fighting Renoir, you find Verso's soul one last time. Verso's soul states that Renoir is doing what needs to be done for everyone's sake. I mean, if Verso's soul is saying that Renoir is in the right, where do we even go from here? This is about as close as they can possibly make the right ending to canon. If you're still on the fence, you're not allowed to vote anymore, I'm sorry.
Just want you to understand what this canvas means to me.
I do understand. I know how powerful and intoxicating it is. How deeply attached we can become to the worlds we pour our hearts and souls into.
Grief often blinds us, and we make choices we can never take back.
You grieve for two.
I grieve for many.
The choices of parents leave indelible marks upon their children. But ultimately, the voices in their head have to be their own. You cannot set the boundaries of their life for them.
Your friends speak truth, and it changes nothing. You can hate me, but that's a choice I must make. As your father, I must look out for you, especially when you can't look out for yourself.
You treat me as if I'm still 5!
I treat you as if the shadow from the worst day of our lives is going to suffocate you and take you from us too!
It's refreshing to see Renoir talking like a normal human being here. He doesn't disregard what Lune and CL say, and in fact he acknowledges that what they're saying is true, but he is also smart enough to understand that what they're saying has no bearing on the situation at hand, absolutely no bearing whatsoever. Aline is his wife, Alicia is his daughter, he has no choice but to save them from themselves. Period, end of story. Renoir's fight is the mirror to Aline's. He uses his own brush and interacts with chroma and the canvas in similar ways to Aline, but with his own signature, much like two artists using the same techniques. Upon getting through the first phase, Sirène, the Axon we once defeated, now revived, saves Renoir. When you're playing through the game, it can be easy to lose yourself in the moment and not think about what's happening in front of you, but obviously this isn't going to matter. Renoir can't be killed. Maëlle can't be killed. This is yet another stalemate between Renoir and his family. As though to try and tip the scales, Aline makes an entrance.
Mama.
Aline, you're going to kill yourself. It's too soon for you to return to any canvas. You're selfish, Aline!
Don't make the mistake of setting aside Renoir's comment here. Aline is being more than selfish. Her daughter is going to kill herself and she's doing everything in her power to make sure that happens. Like I said, this bitch needs to be put in a straitjacket. It is entirely unacceptable for a mother to treat her daughter this way.
But Everett, Alicia should have the right to kill herself. It makes her feel better. Her body, her choice, Everett.
Shut the fuck up. You don't have the right to vote anymore, remember? Get Renoir down to half HP during his second phase and he begins his temper tantrum. He also says the worst line in the whole game.
Aline, it's supposed to be you and me. Not you against me.
What are you, 5? It's only been 67 years, mate. And then Renoir begins flying. Wow, it's so cool. Look at his wings. Oh my goodness, it looks so bad. It's all written so bad. Come on, guys. This is supposed to be the peak of the game right now. Defeat Renoir. He accepts his position of not being able to remain in a persistent stalemate with his family and resigns to hoping Alicia finds the will to get out on her own terms. Or someone else's terms, at the very least.
I hope you find peace. Hold on to each other.
Why would he say something like that? Why would he encourage Alicia to do the exact opposite thing he has been trying to get his family to do for the last 67 years? Verso approaches the space in between the canvas and the real world, entering a sort of limbo that he shouldn't be able to live in. I don't like what Lune's hand is doing here. What is this? Verso approaches his soul. It's time to stop painting.
You're tired of painting, aren't you? I'm tired too.
Why did you run in? It's dangerous for you here.
See things as they are, not how you want them to be.
What?
You lied to your father.
No.
He saw it too. But he wanted to believe. You're going to die here. Why don't you just leave? You can always come back.
The moment I leave, Papa will erase this canvas.
This is not worth your life. It's time to stop painting.
Mael is openly using force against Verso's soul, his literal soul at this point, so we can go ahead and sign off on her being the antagonist.
Papa also said, hold on to each other.
I guess that's why they made Renoir say that line. Oh, Verso can see that if his father couldn't crack this egg, that he isn't going to be able to. Wishing for death, wishing for an end, he draws his weapons against Mael. And here we have the final choice for the game. Fight as Mael against Verso if you are Team Blue. Fight as Verso if you are Team Red. We're going over what happens if you choose Team Blue here. Verso finally cracks as he realizes that he's never been closer nor further from his death. He begs Mael to stop Verso's soul from painting, and he begs Mael to unpaint him. It's fucking heartbreaking. Mael gamages Verso, and we're shown a scene of the Opera House, which has Lumiere and citizens lining up to go in. Minoko and Esquier are shown acting as security, and it really looks uncanny. It looks like it's really poorly done. I can't really explain it. Do you see what I'm saying though? It almost looks like a fan animation. Mael surveys the seating area to find her posse. She's accompanied by a very young boy who, like the other boys in the game, had adults used as their models, so their faces are really strange looking. They are 50 years older than they truly are. Oh dear. Lune and Ciel are there. Ciel is with who I have to presume is her husband, who passed away many a year ago, and Lune is alone, which feels odd, but whatever. Gustav joins them, and he's with Sophie. Wow, it's a literal fucking nightmare. He smiles like this. There is a 50% chance that everything here is poorly animated because it's supposed to look shitty and creepy, because this is a horrible ending. But also, let's not give Sandfall too much credit. There is a 50% chance they actually just dropped the ball with this scene. It's not outside the realm of believability that this ending was rushed in favor of finishing the other one first as the quote-unquote real ending. It could be either possibility. I just don't want to stick my neck out and say which reason is the most likely, because honestly I have no clue if this is intentional or not. It wouldn't be the first time Sandfall sucked at animationally. The performance begins. All 30 citizens of Lumiere applaud, and aged Verso looks out into the crowd with an apparent disgust. His gaze. The gaze of the three dearest companions, Ciel, Lune, and not Mael, but Alicia. Her face not covered in burn scars, but chroma, her right eye missing, just as in the real world, but also filled with chroma as though to suggest this painted world all that she can see. Verso prepares himself. I lied to you when I said there were 2 versions of the main menu theme. There are actually 4. The main menu theme, the duo's theme, the theme played during Mael's birth, and this version, which replaces the obscure invented language with modern French, revealing the nature, the true nature, of the story and its lyrics. I might have a lot of negative things to say about this ending, but when I say that it's a bad ending, I don't mean it's badly done. It is, in a lot of ways, badly done, but like with almost everything in Clair Obscur, there are some real strengths to accompany the not-so-grand aspects of it. The visuals being one of the worst and best of that dichotomy. Verso's ending, Team Red's ending, the only good ending. Just as I say that Mael's ending being a bad ending doesn't mean every aspect of it is badly done, nor do I mean that Verso's ending being a good one is one of quality. We have things to criticize it for too. First, Verso takes up arms against Mael. Mael and Verso share these words.
Verso, stop! You can't just decide this for everyone!
We're all hypocrites, doing the same thing to each other.
That is the dumbest shit I have ever heard. Verso is not a hypocrite. Verso has always wanted to get his family out of the canvas and end his non-existence. To be a hypocrite, he would have to want to stop everyone else from doing that. Does anyone here know what hypocrite even means? How the fuck can Verso be a hypocrite? The only way you can even begin to apply that term to him is if you think Alicia's life outside of the canvas is no life at all. In which case, you're Team Blue, in which case, you're stupid, in both cases, you have lost the right to vote, shut up. Seriously though, Alicia's life outside of the canvas is not a non-existence. It's her only existence, you morons. All else is but a mirage. Doing the same thing to each other, says Verso. Just like Renoir saying hold on to each other, just like Painted Alicia not giving a proper goodbye to her brother, just like Verso pretending that defeating the two Axons was a dead end. This doesn't make any sense. It's just here to provide a false sense of conflict. There is no question. Verso is absolutely in the right here. Alicia wants to imprison Verso's soul for her own gain. Nobody wants to imprison Alicia for their gain except for Alicia. Nobody is being a hypocrite. The writers just made Verso say this because who fucking knows? Maybe it's just for cheap conflict, but honestly, I could see Team Blue members throwing a hissy fit over Verso's ending being pretty obviously the most moral ending available, so the writers just threw this line in. Again, to provide a cheap sense of equality across the moral philosophy of this game. There is no equality. Alicia is behaving, has been behaving in an entirely immoral way. Verso, by contrast, is just. It couldn't be any more black and white. Verso knocks the Mael right out of Alicia. She begins to gamage. Monoko and Esquier come to say their goodbyes, and they're gone. CL comes to say her goodbyes. One last time? Asks Verso. She almost does, but nah. Lune, Lumiere behind, accepts her position and sits down. Being the analyst that she is, I find it accurate that Lune would refuse to enter the space in between and instead stay in Lumiere. While CL would use these last moments to do something she had never done. In CL's case, she accepted her death immediately. In Lune's case, I think she knows what's about to happen, but is far more frustrated with the outcome after everything that's taken place. Our painted Verso approaches the soul of real Verso. It's time to stop painting. And they're gone. Verso's ending is one of acceptance. CL and Lune accept their fate. Verso and his soul accept theirs. Although Alicia couldn't accept her fate within the canvas, she will accept it where it matters, in her life. In the real world, Aline and Renoir are shown moving towards each other for the first time in the whole game. They have each other. Mael clutches an expensive piece of merchandise to remind Team Blue to get their wallets out. Actually, to show, perhaps, a level of emotional underdevelopment as a cause of all these events which have taken place. Ultimately, she'll need to grow beyond them, which can only happen by living. She has her strife. Cleo holds flowers close before laying them at Verso's grave. Where Aline and Renoir have each other, representing their family repaired, where Alicia has her stuffed toy, representing her present state of mind, Clea's flowers represent her love for Verso. It is the most appropriate mentality to have in a time like this. And Clea has her burden, as Renoir so accurately depicted, of hauling the future of this family across one finish line to the next, whether internal conflict with each other or external with the writers. The whole gang waves Alicia off, except for Gustav, who beckons her. I always felt this was a strange detail that didn't fit in with the rest of the scene. Last to go is Mael, who disappears, arms crossed, perhaps stubborn. Verso's creations disappear into what I think are red flower petals. The Lumierans definitely disappear into red flower petals, and Verso disappears into white flower petals, while Mael disappears into gold. As represented in the first few minutes of the game, the two colors, red and white, representing pieces of lean and pieces of verso, with Miles' small contribution tucked away only in specific instances. The song that plays in verso's ending, titled Au lendemains non écrits, has a verse that when translated to English reads, "Mirror of time, our stories align. In the palms of our hands, two worlds emerge. One painted as a dream where grief fades, the other naked, real, where our mourning takes place." In a world where you could have seen me play this game all the way through, you would have been able to pick up on the nuances in my relationship with it. I understand that watching this video will leave everyone who loves this game to think that I absolutely hate it, and everyone who hates this game to think that I'm doing my best to compliment it when I absolutely shouldn't. The truth is that this game has major attributes that are better, worse, and exactly equal to the sum of its parts. It's an ambitious title, made by a large group of artists across many different mediums. There were a lot of hands in the pot when cooking this thing up, despite what many of us believed early on. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is one of a kind. It's a very, very good game, and it's fairly underwhelming. And it's terrible. Altogether, I would rather have this game in this vision and execution than with some of my problems with it fixed, because despite the flaws, Clair Obscur succeeds in the way the artists behind it wanted it to. Additionally, I think the game will serve as a very clear marker for Sandfall's quality moving forwards. I believe they need to mature their dialogue. I believe they need to observe more artistic caution to ensure their characters are behaving in ways that only make perfect sense for their character, even if it means making the game takes more effort. And I think they need to heavily iterate on the combat mechanics, because parrying simulation, while having a place in games like this, should not be the sole focus of everything encompassing combat. As for the soundtrack, Sandfall, if you get another game with an OST as half as good as this one, I'd say you're doing fine, because nothing is touching this game for the next decade at least. It really is that good. Jesus Christ, it's that good. But does all of this mean that Clair Obscur is the game everyone claims it is? Absolutely not. Expedition 33 managed to overwhelm the eyes and ears of its player base such that every other critical facet of their being was unable to analyze what was being played. The vast majority of players that I have seen talk about this game are very clearly emotionally tied to it. They identify with a character or two, they identify with some of the philosophy shown in the game, and the music ties it all together to make them emotionally overwhelmed. It made me emotionally overwhelmed many times because it's a very good game with very good artists behind it. It will win Game of the Year, but does it deserve that? This question has become increasingly difficult to answer as of late. No longer does Game of the Year really mean best game of this year. Rather, Game of the Year quite literally means the game that came out this year. Maybe Clair Obscur is that game. Maybe it is the game that came out this year. Everyone was talking about it, just about every other person on Earth played it, but, you know, Silksong also came out this year. I realize that the people watching this video probably don't have much love for shooters, but did you know that Escape from Tarkov is a marvel of genius and malicious genius that has created a whole genre on its own? That was fully released into 1.0 this year. Does that count? How about Blueprints? Probably not Blueprints, but how about Death Stranding 2? Maybe a dark horse in the race, or maybe something more? It's hard to say what the game of the year is, but you know what's also somewhat difficult to say? It is a bit troublesome to say with absolute certainty that Expedition 33, when everything is considered, is definitely better than these other games. And I know it isn't troublesome for you, the viewer, and that's the point of this video, isn't it? Yes, the music is as good as everyone says it is, or better. Yes, the story is as original as everyone says it is. And it is there that we can stop saying this game has not been overrated by the larger gaming community. The animation is inconsistent while being inspired at best and absolutely amateur fan work at its worst. The gameplay is tied by one sole mechanic, and yet still manages to lack even basic meaningful cohesion that is supposed to define the party RPG style. It is arguable that due to the lack of meaningful gameplay differences between each character, thanks in part to the parry mechanic, which makes all other mechanics equivalent to aesthetic differences rather than actual gameplay differences, that Final Fantasy manages to more wholly integrate engaging party-based gameplay into its DNA, and I'm talking 1987. The writing, broadly, is very ambiguous and definitely has a lot of variables to look after, but it doesn't look after them on a micro level. Time and again, we have characters doing things they wouldn't, saying things they wouldn't. Sometimes these moments aren't due to forgetful, small moments from Sandfall. Sometimes they are intentionally designed to artificially prop up parts of the game that are to come later, but that's just the thing. So many parts of the scaffolding of this game are built on half-secured boards that aren't strong enough to hold the weight of the project under any sort of scrutiny. And how it crumbles the closer you look. Aline didn't even attempt to communicate to the Lumiereans that Renoir is the source of their gamage. Wouldn't that have been the first thing she'd do? Maëlle didn't immediately try to revive Gustave. Wouldn't that have been the first thing she did when finding out it was possible? What are we even doing here? Everyone seemed so impressed that Sandfall wasn't a huge studio when they developed this game, that somehow, because they outsourced a lot of their work to third parties, Clair Obscur's success has been a hit against AAA studios. Absolutely not. What is the difference between Ubisoft and Sandfall? Those who work for Ubisoft are known as employees, those who work for Sandfall are known as companies. Somehow that doesn't impress me, and in fact I would bet at least some of the inconsistencies we've talked about with Clair Obscur might have something to do with the fact that Sandfall was outsourcing a lot of the work to other people. Or maybe not. Save for the music, I have no idea what rights and wrongs belong to who and why. All I have access to is the game. And the game is overrated by a huge margin. Game of the year? Maybe. Maybe it does deserve this award that it's definitely going to win, but as we've discussed, that award is a little difficult to decipher in its meaning and in its value. So have fun with it. Best game of the year? A little less likely of a maybe, but I have to admit that this conversation is a testament to Clair Obscur's quality, as its topical relevance revolves around how Expedition 33 pairs up against the very best, and I do have to admit it's pretty close, all things considered. And of course, the game is more than worth the price of admission. And it's more than worth playing fully, because the quality that it does have can't be found anywhere else right now. I pray that Sandfall continues to experiment with their formula, and I believe that if they do, and if they do it right, the best from them is yet to come. In the future, we may find a title of theirs that wins Game of the Year and unequivocally deserves it. Good luck, have fun.
That's the case with Expedition 33. That's a game that is about painting. You would have told that to gamers like, hey, we're gonna make a game about painting and art in like old La Belle Époque, early 20th century France. Will you buy it? People would be like, the fuck are you talking about? And though even like that, they were able to make a game that, you know, that make unanimity. So that's what I love about the game, and I wish we'll get like all of it at the Game Awards. I wish we will get all of it, everything. So, voilà.